Ethan Blake never imagined that opening his apartment door on a rainy Tuesday night would cost him everything he'd worked for, and give him everything he never knew he needed. The woman sitting on his building steps, drenched and trembling, wasn't asking for money or directions. She was running from a world of wealth and control that would soon come crashing into his struggling single-father life with the force of a wrecking ball. One choice, one stranger, one night that would tear apart his carefully balanced survival and rebuild it into something he'd risk his life to protect. If you want to see how far one moment of kindness can go, stay until the end. Drop a like and comment your city so I can see how far this story travels. Ethan Blake's alarm went off at 5:30 in the morning, same as it had every day for the past 3 years. He reached over and silenced it before it could wake Jamie, his 6-year-old son sleeping in the next room. The apartment was cold. The heater had been acting up again, and he'd been putting off calling the landlord because he knew what that conversation would turn into. Another lecture about late rent, another reminder that he was barely hanging on. He sat up slowly, his back protesting. The double shifts at the warehouse were catching up with him. 30 years old, and he already felt twice that age. His knees cracked when he stood, and there was a persistent ache in his lower back that never fully went away anymore. He'd stopped going to the doctor about it because he couldn't afford the copay, let alone whatever treatment they'd recommend. The coffee maker sputtered to life in the kitchen, filling the small space with the only warm smell the place had to offer. Ethan stood at the counter in his boxers and an old t-shirt with a faded logo he couldn't even read anymore, waiting for the pot to fill, staring at the stack of bills he'd shoved to the corner of the counter the night before. Electric, water, credit card minimums he couldn't meet, a notice from Jamie's school about unpaid lunch fees, a threatening letter from the hospital about the emergency room visit from 4 months ago when Jamie had fallen off the playground equipment and needed stitches. The envelope seemed to multiply when he wasn't looking, breeding in the dark like some kind of financial plague. "Morning, Dad." Ethan turned. Jamie stood in the doorway of his bedroom, clutching the stuffed bear that used to be his mother's. The thing was nearly falling apart now, one eye missing, stuffing coming out of a seam Ethan kept meaning to sew up but never did. The kid's hair stuck up in 6 different directions, and his SpongeBob pajamas had a hole in the knee that had started small but was getting bigger every day. "Morning, buddy. You sleep okay?" Jamie nodded, but his eyes had that look, the one that meant he'd probably woken up in the middle of the night again, calling for a mom who hadn't been around for 2 years. The one that meant he'd padded into Ethan's room and stood by the bed, silent and small, until Ethan woke up and let him climb in. "Bad dreams?" Ethan asked gently. "A little. Want to talk about it?" Jamie shook his head and shuffled to the kitchen table. He did that a lot lately, kept things to himself, like he'd learned early that adding his problems to his dad's pile would just make everything heavier. "Cereal or toast?" Ethan asked, though he already knew the answer. They had this conversation every morning, following the same script because routine was one of the few things they could count on. "Cereal." Ethan pulled down the generic brand cornflakes, the big bag from the discount store that tasted like cardboard but lasted longer than the name brand, and poured them into a bowl that didn't match any of the other dishes they owned. Nothing in this apartment matched. The furniture was a collection of secondhand finds and sidewalk rescues. The plates and cups were whatever he'd managed to grab from the dollar store or inherit from his own childhood. The living room couch had a spring that poked through the middle cushion, and the coffee table had cigarette burns from whoever owned it before them. The milk was 2 days from its expiration date. Ethan sniffed it before pouring, a habit he'd developed after one unfortunate morning when he hadn't checked, and decided it was still good enough. He made a mental note to grab more on the way home from work, then immediately forgot it because his brain was already juggling 40 other things that needed attention. "You got your homework done?" he asked as Jamie climbed onto one of the wobbly kitchen chairs. "Mostly." "What's mostly mean?" Jamie shrugged, spooning cereal into his mouth. "I got stuck on the reading." Ethan's chest tightened. The school had sent home a note last week saying Jamie was falling behind in reading comprehension, that he was struggling to keep up with the other kids, that he might benefit from a tutor or additional support at home. A tutor. As if Ethan could afford that. As if he had time to be 2 parents instead of barely managing to be 1. As if he knew the first thing about teaching a kid to read better when he himself had dropped out of high school to work full-time after his own parents died. "We'll work on it tonight," Ethan said. even though he knew tonight would be the same as every other night. Him stumbling in at 8 or 9 o'clock, exhausted and hollow, microwaving something that barely qualified as dinner while Jamie watched cartoons alone, both of them too tired to do anything but exist in the same space. "Okay," Jamie said quietly, and that single word carried the weight of all the broken promises that came before it. The kid never complained. That was the worst part. He just accepted everything with this quiet resignation that no 6-year-old should have. When other kids talked about going to movies or birthday parties or weekend trips, Jamie just listened and nodded like those things happened in a different universe. When his classmates brought in elaborate school projects with help from their parents, Jamie brought in whatever he could cobble together from craft supplies Ethan grabbed from the dollar store on the way home from work. Ethan's phone buzzed on the counter, making him jump. A text from his supervisor. "Can you stay late tonight? Martinez called in sick." He closed his eyes and counted to 5, trying to push down the frustration. Another late shift meant another night of Jamie sitting with Mrs. Chen from downstairs, watching TV in her cramped apartment that smelled like menthol cigarettes and old cooking oil. Another night of his son falling asleep on someone else's couch, in someone else's space, because his father couldn't be there. "Yeah, no problem," he typed back, because what else could he say? No wasn't an option when you were living paycheck to paycheck, when saying no to overtime meant not making rent, when every single shift mattered because there was no safety net, no backup plan, no rich relatives to call when things got tight. Just him. Just this. Just barely surviving. The morning routine continued on autopilot. Ethan got dressed in jeans that were wearing thin at the knees and a flannel shirt that had seen better days, the elbows patched with fabric that didn't quite match. He made sure Jamie had his backpack ready, checked that he'd brushed his teeth, the kid always tried to skip that step, and locked the apartment behind them as they headed out into the cold November morning. The elevator in their building worked about 60% of the time, so they took the stairs. 3 floors down, Ethan's knees protesting with each step, Jamie bouncing ahead with the boundless energy of a kid who hadn't yet learned that life was exhausting. The elementary school was 6 blocks away. They walked it together every morning, Jamie's small hand in his, neither of them talking much. The neighborhood was the kind of place where people kept their heads down and minded their own business. Convenience stores with bars on the windows, apartment buildings with peeling paint, a laundromat where Ethan spent 2 hours every Sunday watching clothes tumble because their building's machines were always broken. Other kids passed them on the walk, some with both parents, some with mothers in yoga pants carrying coffee cups that cost more than Ethan made in an hour, some with nannies or older siblings. Ethan tried not to notice, tried not to compare, tried not to feel the burning shame of knowing his kid was growing up with less than everyone around him. "Dad?" Jamie's voice pulled him back to the present. "Yeah, buddy? Can we get pizza sometime? Like real pizza from a restaurant?" The question hit him like a physical blow. "Sure. Maybe this weekend." "Really?" "Maybe," Ethan corrected, hating himself for the qualifier. "We'll see how things go." Jamie's excitement dimmed but didn't fully disappear, and Ethan knew his son was already building that hope into something bigger than it should be, already imagining a Friday night where they sat in a booth at some pizza place like normal people, like families who had enough to spare for dinner out. They reached the school entrance. Other kids were streaming in, some running, some dragging their feet, all of them part of a world that kept spinning, whether you could keep up or not. "Have a good day," Ethan said, crouching down to zip Jamie's jacket up higher. The zipper caught halfway, the mechanism wearing out, and he made a mental note to replace it. Another thing for the list that never got shorter. "Mrs. Chen's picking you up again, okay?" "Okay." Jamie's face fell slightly. "I wish you could pick me up sometimes." The words hit like a punch to the gut, landing in that place where all his failures lived. "I know, buddy, me too." Jamie nodded and headed inside without looking back, his backpack bouncing against his shoulders, and Ethan stood there on the sidewalk feeling like the world's biggest failure. Around him, other parents were chatting, making plans for playdates and carpools, existing in a realm of stability and presence that felt impossibly far away. He checked his watch. 7:45. If he caught the bus in the next 5 minutes, he'd make it to work on time. If he missed it, he'd be late, and Rick would make some snide comment about reliability, and the whole day would start off wrong. He ran. Work was work. 10 hours of moving boxes, loading trucks, unloading shipments that seemed to multiply no matter how many he processed. The warehouse was massive, rows and rows of shelving units stretching up toward fluorescent lights that hummed constantly, creating a background buzz that never quite faded. In summer, the place was an oven. In winter, it was an icebox. There was no in-between, no comfortable middle ground, just extremes that you learned to endure because the paycheck came every 2 weeks, and that was what mattered. Ethan's supervisor was a guy named Rick Kowalski, who thought screaming at people was the same as managing them. He was in his mid-40s, with a gut that hung over his belt and a voice that could carry across the entire warehouse floor. He'd been with the company for 20 years and wore that tenure like a badge of honor, reminding everyone who'd listen that he'd worked his way up from the bottom. "Blake," Rick's voice cut through the din of machinery and movement. "You're on receiving today. Truck's coming in at 9, and I want it unloaded by noon." "Got it," Ethan called back. "And don't half-ass it like Johnson did yesterday. Everything scanned, everything logged, everything in its place." "Got it," Ethan repeated, biting back the dozen responses he wanted to give. The receiving bay was the worst assignment, cramped, chaotic, and physically brutal. Boxes of all sizes and weights, some clearly mislabeled, some damaged in transit, all of them needing to be processed quickly because there was always another truck coming, always another shipment waiting. Ethan's coworkers were a rotating cast of people just as tired as he was. A few guys he'd exchanged nods with: Marcus, who had 3 kids and worked 2 jobs; Tony, who was putting himself through community college and always looked half asleep; Derek, who never talked about his life but had the haunted look of someone running from something. There was also Carmen, a woman in her 50s who'd been at the warehouse longer than anyone except Rick. She had a sharp wit and zero tolerance for bullshit, and she was one of the few people Ethan actually enjoyed working with. "You look like hell," she said when she found him in the break room at lunch, eating a sandwich he'd thrown together that morning, peanut butter and jelly because it was cheap and didn't require refrigeration. "Thanks, Carmen. You really know how to make a guy feel special." "I'm serious. You getting any sleep?" "Some." That's not an answer. Ethan took another bite of his sandwich, not wanting to get into it. Carmen meant well, but talking about his problems didn't change them. It just made them feel heavier. "How's Jamie?" she asked, switching tactics. "He's good, growing like a weed." "He's still struggling with reading?" Ethan had mentioned it once, weeks ago, and Carmen had remembered. She was good like that, keeping track of the small details that most people forgot. "Yeah, school wants me to get him a tutor." "And you can't afford it?" "Not even close." Carmen was quiet for a moment, unwrapping her own lunch, leftovers in a container that looked homemade. "My daughter used to tutor kids when she was in college. I could ask if she knows anyone who does it cheap, or maybe even volunteer work." "You don't have to do that." "I know I don't have to. I'm offering." There was that phrase again. The same one he'd used with Mia, the same one that seemed to be echoing through his life lately. Offering, helping, extending a hand even when there was no obligation to do so. "Thanks," Ethan said, meaning it. "I appreciate it. Don't mention it. We all need help sometimes. No shame in that." But there was shame in it, Ethan thought. At least for him. Shame in not being able to provide and not being enough, and constantly needing help just to keep his head above water. The rest of the day blurred together. More boxes, more scanning, more of Rick yelling about quotas and efficiency. At 7:30, when most people were heading home, Ethan was just getting to the extra shift he'd agreed to cover. "You stay until close?" Rick asked, appearing out of nowhere like he always did. "That's the plan." "Good man." Rick clapped him on the shoulder like they were friends, like Ethan had any choice in the matter, like this was some noble sacrifice instead of simple desperation. The extra hours meant extra pay, which meant maybe, he could finally fix the heater properly instead of relying on space heaters that jacked up the electric bill. Maybe he could buy Jamie those new shoes that didn't pinch his toes. Maybe he could actually take his kid out for that pizza dinner instead of it being another empty promise. Maybe. He texted Mrs. Chen, "Running late again. Sorry." Her reply came fast. "No problem, sweetheart. Jamie is fine. We're watching Jeopardy." Ethan wanted to believe that, but fine was a relative term when your kid was spending more time with the elderly neighbor than his own father. Mrs. Chen was good to them. She never complained, never charged him for babysitting, never made him feel like the burden he knew he was. But Jamie should be at home, with his parent, living a normal life, whatever normal meant. By the time he finally clocked out, it was nearly 9 o'clock and the rain had started. Not a drizzle or a light mist, a full downpour that soaked through his jacket in seconds. Of course he'd left his umbrella at home. Of course the bus was running late. Of course the universe had decided today needed one more kick in the teeth. He stood under the insufficient shelter of the bus stop, watching headlights cut through the rain, trying to remember the last time something had actually gone right. Last week? Last month? He genuinely couldn't recall a moment where life had exceeded his low expectations instead of falling short of them. The bus finally arrived, 30 minutes behind schedule. Ethan collapsed into a seat near the back, his clothes dripping onto the floor, and pulled out his phone to check the time. 9:45. Jamie would already be asleep at Mrs. Chen's. Another night of his son going to bed without him, another night of being an absent father who was technically present in the same city, but might as well be on another planet. He opened his messages, scrolled through the last few texts from Mrs. Chen. Little updates throughout the day. Jamie ate all his lunch today. He got an A on his spelling test. He's asking when you'll be home. That last one made his chest ache. The ride home took forever, the bus stopping every few blocks to let more drenched, miserable people on and off. Ethan closed his eyes and tried not to think about tomorrow, or the day after that, or the next 6 months of grinding through this existence until something finally broke, until his body gave out, or he got laid off, or Jamie's school called to say his son was failing, and there was nothing Ethan could do to help because he was failing too, failing at everything that mattered. When the bus finally reached his stop, he stepped out into the rain and started the walk to his building. 3 blocks. He could make it 3 blocks. He'd made it through worse. The neighborhood looked different at night, darker, emptier, the few people out moving quickly with their heads down. Ethan kept his hands in his pockets and his eyes forward, following a route he'd walked 1,000 times before. That's when he saw her. She was sitting on the steps outside his apartment building, huddled against the brick wall, soaked to the bone. At first he thought she might be homeless, but something about her didn't fit that profile. Her clothes were too nice, jeans that actually fit properly, a jacket that looked expensive, even drenched, boots that probably cost more than his monthly rent. Ethan slowed as he approached. The woman had her knees pulled up to her chest, her dark hair plastered to her face. She wasn't crying, but there was something broken in the way she sat there, like she'd run out of places to go and this was just where she'd stopped. He should keep walking. That was the smart move. That was what anyone with half a brain and a full plate of their own problems would do. He had enough chaos without getting involved in whatever this was. But he stopped anyway, because apparently making bad decisions was his specialty. "You okay?" he called out over the sound of the rain. She looked up, and even in the dim light from the street lamp, he could see the fear in her eyes. Not fear of him, fear of something else, something she'd left behind or was still running from. Her eyes were red-rimmed like she'd been crying earlier but had exhausted herself past that point. "I'm fine," she said, but her voice shook, and the lie was obvious even through the rain. "You don't look fine." "I just need a minute." "You've been sitting in the rain. That's more than a minute." She didn't respond to that, just stared at him like she was trying to figure out if he was a threat or just a nuisance. Ethan glanced up at his building, then back at her. Every instinct he had was screaming at him to walk away. He didn't know this woman. He didn't have the bandwidth to take on someone else's crisis. He barely had the bandwidth to handle his own life, and adding another variable to the equation was asking for disaster. "You waiting for someone?" he asked. "No." "You live in this building?" She shook her head, water dripping from her hair onto her shoulders. "Then what are you doing here?" For a long moment she didn't answer. The rain kept falling, and Ethan kept standing there like an idiot, waiting for an explanation that probably wouldn't make any sense. Around them, the city continued its nighttime rhythm. Distant sirens, cars splashing through puddles, the hum of traffic from the main street a few blocks over. "I don't have anywhere else to go," she said finally, so quietly he almost didn't hear it over the rain. And there it was. The thing he'd been afraid she'd say. The answer that turned this from a simple moment of curiosity into a decision point, a fork in the road where one path led to walking away and maintaining his precarious balance, and the other path led to what? He didn't even know. Ethan ran a hand through his wet hair, water dripping down his neck, soaking into his collar. He should tell her about a shelter. There was one about 15 blocks from here. He'd passed it on the bus route. Or he could give her the number for social services, or suggest she call a friend or family member, or literally anything other than what he was about to do. "Come on," he heard himself say. She looked up at him, confused. "What?" "It's pouring. You'll freeze to death out here." He gestured toward the building entrance. "I've got a couch. You can dry off, get warm. One night." I can't." "One night," Ethan repeated firmly. "Then tomorrow you figure out your next move. But sitting in the rain isn't going to solve whatever problem you're running from." She stared at him like she was trying to decide if he was being genuine or if this was some kind of trap. He couldn't blame her for that hesitation. Men didn't usually offer help without expecting something in return. The world had taught women to be suspicious of kindness, and probably for good reason. "I'm not," he struggled for the right words. "I'm not trying anything. I've got a kid sleeping at my neighbor's place downstairs. You look like you need help, and I'm apparently bad at minding my own business." That got the smallest hint of something that might have been a smile, barely visible in the dark. She stood up slowly, unsteadily, like she'd been sitting there for hours and her legs had gone numb. Up close, he could see she was younger than he'd initially thought, mid-20s probably, with sharp features that might have been pretty if they weren't currently arranged in an expression of exhausted wariness. "Okay," she said finally, her voice barely audible. "One night." Ethan unlocked the building door and held it open for her. She stepped inside, dripping water all over the lobby floor, and followed him to the elevator. They rode up to the third floor in silence, the ancient machinery groaning with every foot of ascent, the fluorescent light inside flickering like it might die at any moment. His apartment looked worse than usual. Dishes in the sink from 3 days ago, toys scattered across the living room floor, a stack of laundry he'd meant to fold sitting on the armchair where it had been living for nearly a week now. The woman stepped inside tentatively, like she was entering a crime scene and might contaminate evidence. "It's not much," Ethan said, which was the understatement of the century. The apartment was small, cluttered, and worn down in the way that comes from years of neglect and not enough money to fix things properly. "It's warm," she replied, and he realized she was shivering, her whole body trembling from the cold and the rain and probably adrenaline from whatever had put her on those steps in the first place. "Bathroom's down the hall. There's towels in the closet." He moved to his bedroom and grabbed one of his clean t-shirts and a pair of sweatpants from the drawer. They'd be too big on her, but at least they were dry. "These'll be huge, but at least they're warm." She took the clothes from him, and their fingers briefly touched. Hers were ice cold, so cold it startled him. "Thank you," she said, and disappeared into the bathroom. Ethan stood in his living room, dripping onto the floor, trying to process what he'd just done. He'd invited a complete stranger into his home. A woman he knew nothing about, who was clearly running from something, who could be anyone, could be dangerous, could be unstable, could be bringing problems that would make his already difficult life completely impossible. Brilliant, absolutely brilliant. He changed into dry clothes, sweatpants and a t-shirt that had holes in it but at least wasn't soaked, and started a pot of coffee, because whatever conversation was about to happen would go better with caffeine. His hands were shaking slightly as he measured out the grounds, and he told himself it was just from the cold, from the rain, not from the awareness that he'd just made a decision that could change everything. The bathroom door opened and the woman emerged wearing his clothes, which hung off her frame like she was a kid playing dress-up. She'd towel-dried her hair, and now he could see her face properly, younger than he'd initially thought, maybe mid-20s, with sharp cheekbones and eyes that had seen too much. There was a bruise on her wrist, fading but still visible, and a scratch on her neck that might have been from running through branches, or might have been from something worse. "Coffee?" he offered, his voice sounding strange in the quiet apartment. "Please." They sat at the kitchen table, two strangers in a rundown apartment holding mismatched mugs. His had a chip in the rim, hers had a faded logo from some company event he'd never attended, and not quite looking at each other. The silence stretched out, filled with the sound of rain against the windows and the drip of water from their wet clothes left in the bathroom. "I'm Ethan," he said finally, because someone had to break the silence. "Mia," she replied, wrapping both hands around the mug like she was trying to absorb its warmth through her palms. "You want to tell me what you're running from, Mia?" She stared into the dark liquid like it might have answers written in the steam. Her jaw worked like she was trying to find the right words, or maybe trying to decide if she should say anything at all. It's complicated. Most things are. She was quiet for a long time, and Ethan didn't push. He'd made his offer, opened his home, and now the ball was in her court. Whatever her story was, she'd tell it when she was ready. Or she wouldn't, and tomorrow she'd be gone, and this would just be one weird night in a long string of difficult days. "My family," she said eventually, the words coming out carefully, like she was testing each one before committing to it. "I'm running from my family." "They hurt you?" Ethan asked, thinking of the bruise on her wrist, the scratch on her neck. "Not the way you're thinking." She looked up at him, and there was something in her eyes, anger, maybe, or frustration, or just exhaustion that went bone deep. "They're wealthy, very wealthy, and they have very specific ideas about who I'm supposed to be, what I'm supposed to do, who I'm supposed to marry." Ethan raised an eyebrow. "Marry?" "It's complicated," she said again, and this time there was an edge to her voice. "You keep saying that." "Because it is." The frustration was bleeding through now, cracking the careful control she'd been maintaining. "You wouldn't understand." "Try me." Mia set her mug down with more force than necessary. "My father runs a company, multiple companies actually. Collins Industries, maybe you've heard of it?" Ethan shook his head. He didn't pay attention to that world, the world of corporations and CEOs and people who had enough money to make their problems disappear. "Well, they're big, very big, and everything in my life has been mapped out since I was born. The right schools, the right friends, the right career path, the right everything. And when I turned 25 last month, my father decided it was time for the right marriage, too. To someone you didn't choose. To someone who'd be good for business." She laughed, but there was no humor in it, just bitterness that tasted like acid. "That's all it was. A business arrangement. His name is Marcus Ashford. His family owns half the real estate in the city, and my family wants access to that portfolio. So they arranged it. A merger disguised as a marriage, a transaction with white lace and wedding vows. And you said no. And I said no." Mia's hands tightened around her mug. "I told them I wouldn't do it, that I wasn't some asset to be traded, that I wanted to make my own choices, live my own life. And my father—" She stopped, her jaw tightening. "He didn't take it well. Said I was being selfish, ungrateful, naive. Said I didn't understand what was at stake, what he'd built, what I owed to the family name." "What you owed?" "That's how he sees it. He paid for my education, my lifestyle, everything I've ever had. And in his mind, that means I owe him obedience, compliance, my life in exchange for his money." Ethan absorbed that, trying to imagine growing up in that world. He'd grown up with nothing, scraping by his whole life. And here was someone who'd had everything and was throwing it away. Part of him wanted to judge that, to say she didn't know how good she had it. But the look in her eyes stopped him. Whatever she'd left behind, it had cost her something real. "So you ran," he said. "So I ran." She met his gaze directly now, defiant. 3 weeks ago. I packed a bag, took whatever cash I had saved, and walked out. And I've been moving ever since. Different cities, different shelters, sleeping wherever I could. I had about $3,000 when I left. Now I'm down to 200 and change. "And they're looking for you." It wasn't a question, but she answered anyway. "They have people, private investigators, security firms, connections everywhere. My father doesn't accept defeat, and having his daughter run away it's embarrassing for him. Bad for the company image. He'll find me eventually. He always does." "This has happened before?" Mia nodded slowly. "Twice. Once when I was 19, once when I was 22. Both times I lasted about a month before they found me and dragged me back. Both times I was stupid enough to think I could actually get away." "Third time's the charm?" That pulled a real laugh from her, short and surprised. "Maybe. Or maybe I'm just delusional." She paused. "I shouldn't even be telling you this. I should leave before I drag you into it. You seem like a decent guy, and you don't need my mess landing on your doorstep. Little late for that. I'm serious. My father has lawyers, enforcers, people who make problems disappear. If they find out I'm here, if they think you helped me, then I'll deal with it if it happens," Ethan interrupted. "But right now you're here and you need a place to stay, so let's start with that." Mia studied him for a long moment, like she was trying to figure out what his angle was, what he wanted in return for this kindness. "Why are you doing this?" Honestly, I have no idea. That actually made her smile, just a little. You're either very kind or very stupid. Probably a bit of both. He grabbed a pillow and a blanket from his room, set them up on the couch that was more lumps than cushion. Mia stood awkwardly in the middle of the living room, like she didn't quite believe this was real, like any second now he'd change his mind or reveal the catch that had to be coming. There's more coffee if you want it, Ethan said, gesturing toward the kitchen. Bathroom's down the hall. Try not to burn the place down. I'll do my best. He hesitated at the door to his bedroom, one hand on the frame. For what it's worth, I hope you figure your stuff out. Thanks, Mia said softly. For this? For not asking too many questions. Ethan nodded and closed the door behind him. He stood in his room, listening to the sounds of her settling onto the couch, the creak of springs, the rustle of the blanket, and wondered what the hell he'd just gotten himself into. His phone buzzed on the nightstand. A text from Mrs. Chen. Jamie's still up. Says he can't sleep. Want me to bring him home? Ethan glanced at the clock. Almost 11. He should say yes, should have his son in his own bed. But Jamie would ask questions about the stranger on the couch, and Ethan didn't have good answers yet. Didn't know how to explain why there was a woman he'd never met sleeping in their living room. Let him stay tonight, he typed back. I'll get him in the morning before school. 3 dots appeared, then disappeared. Then, everything okay? Yeah, long story. Tell him I love him. Will do. Ethan set the phone down and lay on top of the covers, still fully clothed. Sleep didn't come easy. He kept thinking about Mia in his living room, about the fear in her eyes, about the family she was running from that had enough power to track her across multiple cities. He thought about Jamie and how his son was already growing up too fast in a world that didn't give kids like him much of a break. He thought about the bills on the counter, and the heater that didn't work, and the life he'd built that was held together with duct tape and desperate hope. And he thought about the choice he'd made tonight, opening his door to someone who needed help, even though he barely had enough for himself. Morning came too fast. Ethan woke to the sound of movement in the kitchen, pots clanking, water running, the smell of coffee that wasn't burnt for once. For a disoriented second, he thought he was dreaming, or that he'd somehow sleepwalked into a parallel universe where his life was different. Then he remembered. He pulled on a sweatshirt and opened his bedroom door. Mia was at the stove, using the one clean pan he owned, scrambling eggs. The coffee pot was already full, and she'd somehow managed to clear away the dishes from the sink. The counter was wiped down, and the stack of bills had been neatly organized into what looked like categories. Morning, she said without turning around. Hope you don't mind. I couldn't sleep, and sitting around felt weird. Ethan blinked, still processing. You made breakfast. Is that okay? Yeah, nobody's cooked in this kitchen in about 2 years. She turned to look at him, spatula in hand. In the morning light filtering through the cheap blinds, she looked less haunted than she had last night, though the wariness was still there in her eyes. I found eggs in your fridge and bread that wasn't completely stale. Figured I could at least earn my keep for the night. You didn't have to do that. I wanted to. They ate at the kitchen table, scrambled eggs and toast that was only slightly burned. It was the best breakfast Ethan had eaten in months, which said more about his life than he wanted to admit. Mia ate quickly, efficiently, like someone who'd learned to take food when it was available because you never knew when the next meal would come. So, she said, picking at the last of her eggs, I should probably get out of your hair. You have somewhere to go? She hesitated, her fork pausing halfway to her mouth. I'll figure something out. That's not an answer. It's the only one I've got. Ethan set down his fork, studying her across the table. Dark circles under her eyes despite however many hours she'd slept. Tension in her shoulders like she was ready to bolt at any second. The same look Jamie got when he was trying to be brave about something that scared him. Stay another day. Mia's head snapped up. What? 1 more day. Figure out your next move. I've got work, but you can stay here. Sleep, shower, whatever you need. I can't ask you to do that. You're not asking. I'm offering. Why? The question came out sharp, almost accusatory. You don't know me. I could be lying about everything. I could rob you blind the second you leave. Ethan looked around his apartment, at the mismatched furniture and the toys scattered on the floor, and the general air of barely making it that permeated every corner. Not exactly a lot to steal. That pulled a laugh from her, short and surprised. Fair point. Look, Ethan said, I don't know your whole story, and maybe I don't need to. But you look like someone who needs a break, and I've been there, so stay. One more day, no strings. Mia studied him for a long moment, like she was trying to figure out the catch, the hidden agenda. Okay, one more day, but I'm cleaning this place while you're gone. It's the least I can do. You don't have to. I'm going to. There was a stubbornness in her voice that told him arguing would be pointless, and honestly, he was too tired to fight about it. All right, knock yourself out. He finished his coffee and grabbed his jacket from the hook by the door. At the threshold, he paused. There's leftovers in the fridge if you get hungry. Help yourself to whatever. TV remote's on the coffee table if you want to watch something. Ethan, Mia said quietly. Thank you, really. He nodded and left before he could second-guess himself again, before the rational part of his brain could catch up and start listing all the reasons this was a terrible idea. Mrs. Chen's apartment smelled like jasmine tea and something baking, probably those almond cookies she made that Jamie loved. The old woman answered the door in her usual outfit, loose pants and a cardigan that had seen better decades, her gray hair pulled back in a neat bun. Good morning, she said, stepping aside to let him in. Jamie's already up. We've been watching the morning news. Ethan found his son at the kitchen table with a bowl of congee in front of him, his eyes glued to the small TV on the counter. He looked up when he heard his father's voice, and his whole face lit up. Dad, can we go to the park today? The question hit him like it always did, full of hope that he'd have to crush. I've got work today, remember? The light in Jamie's eyes dimmed. Oh, right. Mrs. Chen patted Jamie's shoulder with a weathered hand. How about Saturday? I bet your dad can take you then. Can you? Jamie asked, turning that hopeful gaze back on him. Saturday was 4 days away. 4 more days of disappointing his kid. 4 more days of being the father who promised and didn't deliver. Yeah, buddy. Saturday for sure. You said that last Saturday. The words were quiet, matter of fact, and they cut deeper than any accusation could have. Because Jamie was right. He had said that last Saturday, and the Saturday before that, and probably the one before that too. Work always got in the way. Life always got in the way. I know, Ethan said, crouching down to his son's level. And I'm sorry, but this Saturday, I mean it. Jamie looked at him with those big eyes that were too wise for 6 years old, eyes that had already learned not to trust promises too much. Okay. They walked to school together, the morning routine as familiar as breathing. The weather had cleared overnight, leaving everything wet and clean-smelling, puddles reflecting the gray sky. Jamie jumped in every puddle they passed, his cheap sneakers splashing water up onto his jeans. Dad? He said as they approached the school. Yeah? Who's the lady? Ethan's stomach dropped. What lady? Mrs. Chen said you had company last night. Is she your friend? Of course Mrs. Chen had noticed. The woman missed nothing, and in a building this small, secrets didn't last long. She's someone who needed help. She's staying for a little while. Is she nice? I think so. Is she going to stay forever? Nobody, just a few days. Jamie was quiet for a moment, processing. Mom said she was just staying for a few days, too. The words landed like a physical blow, knocking the air from Ethan's lungs. He stopped walking, pulled Jamie to the side of the sidewalk, away from the stream of other kids heading to school. Hey, look at me. Jamie looked up, his expression guarded. This is different from Mom. This lady, her name is Mia. She's just someone who needs a safe place to stay while she figures some things out. She's not replacing anyone. She's not becoming part of our family. She's just visiting, okay? Okay, Jamie said, but Ethan could see the doubt in his son's eyes, the fear that came from having one parent abandon him and learning not to trust that the other wouldn't do the same. I love you, Ethan said, pulling Jamie into a hug. That's never changing. You know that, right? I know. But he said it in the way kids do when they're telling adults what they want to hear, not what they actually believe. Ethan watched Jamie disappear through the school doors, his backpack bouncing against his shoulders, and felt the familiar weight of failure settle over him like a wet blanket. He was screwing this up, all of it. Being a father, being a provider, being someone his kid could count on. Work was a blur of the usual chaos. Rick was in a particularly foul mood, yelling about some shipment that had gotten delayed, taking his frustration out on anyone within earshot. Ethan kept his head down, moved boxes, scanned barcodes, and tried not to think about what Mia might be doing in his apartment. Tried not to worry that he'd come home to find everything valuable gone, or worse, that he'd come home to find his place crawling with whatever people her family had sent to track her down. "You good?" Carmen asked around lunch, finding him in the break room staring at a sandwich he didn't remember making. "Yeah, why?" "You've been weird all morning, more distracted than usual." "Just tired." "That's what you always say?" She pulled out a chair and sat down across from him. "You know you can talk to me, right? I'm not going to judge." Ethan almost laughed. How could he explain this situation? That he'd picked up a stranger off the street, brought her home, and was now letting her stay in his apartment? It sounded insane even in his own head. "I appreciate that, really, but I'm fine." "Stubborn man," Carmen muttered, but she let it drop. The day dragged on. Every hour felt like 3, time moving in that weird way it does when you're anxious about something. When his shift finally ended at 6, Ethan practically ran to catch the bus, his heart pounding with a mixture of anticipation and dread. The apartment building looked the same as always: worn brick, graffiti on the dumpster out back, Mrs. Chen's window with its lace curtains on the second floor. He took the stairs 2 at a time, fumbling with his keys at the door, and stopped. The apartment was transformed, not just clean, organized. The dishes were done and put away. The toys were sorted into labeled bins he didn't remember owning. The living room actually looked like a living room instead of a disaster zone. Even the windows had been cleaned, letting in light that usually got blocked by grime he'd stopped noticing. Mia was on the couch, reading one of Jamie's picture books, something about a bear who couldn't find his way home. She looked up when he came in, and there was something different in her expression, less guarded, almost relaxed. "Hope you don't mind," she said, setting the book down. "I found some old boxes in the closet and used them to organize things." Ethan stood in the doorway, trying to process it. "You didn't have to do all this." "I told you I would." She stood up, brushing off his sweatpants that she was still wearing. "I also fixed your heater. The pilot light was out. Took me about 10 minutes once I figured out where it was." "You fixed the heater. YouTube is a wonderful thing." She gestured toward the kitchen. "I made dinner too. Nothing fancy, just pasta. It's in the fridge if you want to heat it up." He moved to the kitchen in a daze and found a container of spaghetti that looked better than anything he'd cooked in months. Real sauce, not from a jar. Actual vegetables mixed in. "Where did you get ingredients?" "I walked to the corner store, used some of my last money. Hope that's okay." "You didn't need to do that." "I wanted to contribute something." She followed him into the kitchen, leaning against the counter. "You're helping me. The least I can do is make myself useful." Ethan heated up the pasta in the microwave and ate standing at the counter, too tired to care about sitting down properly. It was good, really good. The kind of home-cooked food he'd forgotten existed. "Your son," Mia said carefully. "Jamie, he's 6? "Yeah." "Where is he tonight?" "Neighbor's place. I work late a lot." Mia didn't say anything to that, but he could feel the weight of her thoughts, the questions she wasn't asking. He waited for the judgment, for her to point out what a terrible parent he was, leaving his kid with strangers while he worked himself to exhaustion. "That must be hard," she said instead. "On both of you." The unexpected empathy caught him off guard. "It's not ideal, but it's what I've got." "How long has it been? Since his mom left?" 2 years. Ethan set down his fork, his appetite suddenly gone. She said she couldn't handle it anymore, being a mother, being broke, living like this. So she left. No fight for custody, no visitation, just gone. "I'm sorry." "Don't be. We're better off without her." He said it automatically, the line he'd repeated so many times it had become a script. But hearing it out loud now, in front of someone who was also running from family, it rang hollow. "Are you?" Mia asked quietly. "What?" "Better off. Because it sounds like you're drowning, and Jamie—" She paused, choosing her words carefully. "He's 6 years old and he's reading picture books about lost animals. That's not a coincidence." Ethan felt his jaw tighten. "What are you, a psychologist now?" "No. I'm someone who grew up lonely in a house full of people. I recognize it." The words hung in the air between them, sharp and true. Ethan wanted to argue, to defend himself, to point out that he was doing the best he could with what he had. But the truth was, she was right. Jamie was lonely, and so was he. They were both drowning in different ways, and the water kept rising. "I'm thinking," Mia said slowly, "that if I stayed, hypothetically, I could help with that." Ethan turned around. "What?" "I could pick him up from school, make dinner, help with homework, the stuff you're too busy to do." She held up her hands before he could protest. "I'm not saying you're a bad father. I'm saying you're doing everything alone, and that's impossible. Nobody can do it alone." "I can't ask you to do that." "You're not asking. I'm offering." It was an echo of what he'd said to her that morning, and something about that symmetry made him smile despite himself. "You don't even know Jamie, so introduce us." "This is crazy." "Probably," Mia agreed, "but it could work. You need help. I need somewhere to stay while I figure things out. It's mutually beneficial." Every rational part of Ethan's brain was screaming at him to say no. She was a stranger. He knew nothing about her beyond a story that could be complete fiction. Letting her into his son's life was reckless at best, dangerous at worst. What if her family found her here? What if she was lying about everything? What if Jamie got attached and then she left too, adding another abandonment to his already growing list? But she'd fixed his heater. She'd organized his apartment. She'd made him breakfast and dinner. And the thought of coming home to something other than chaos, of Jamie having someone there after school who wasn't a neighbor doing them a favor. 1 week, he heard himself say. Trial run. If it doesn't work out, no hard feelings. Mia's face broke into a genuine smile, the first real one he'd seen from her. It transformed her features, made her look younger, less haunted. 1 week, I can work with that. But we need ground rules, Ethan added quickly. You don't tell Jamie about your situation. As far as he knows, you're just staying with us for a bit. And if your family shows up, if there's any danger, I'll leave immediately, Mia finished. I won't put you or Jamie at risk. I promise. They shook on it, their hands clasping in the middle of his kitchen, sealing a deal that would change everything. Ethan went to collect Jamie from Mrs. Chen's apartment after dinner. The old woman gave him a knowing look when she opened the door, but didn't ask questions. Jamie was on the couch, half asleep in front of the TV. Come on, buddy. Time to go home. Is the lady still there? Jamie asked groggily. Yeah, she's going to be staying with us for a little while. Her name is Mia, and I want you to be nice to her, okay? Okay. They walked up one flight of stairs, Jamie's small hand in his, and Ethan's heart was pounding harder than it should have been. This was it. The moment where his two worlds collided, where the stranger he'd impulsively helped met the son he'd failed to protect from hardship. Mia was sitting on the couch when they came in, and she stood up immediately, a nervous energy in her movements. Jamie stopped in the doorway, suddenly shy, half hiding behind his father's leg. Jamie, Ethan said gently. This is Mia. Mia. This is my son, Jamie. Hi, Jamie, Mia said softly, crouching down to his level. Your dad's told me a lot about you. Jamie looked at his father for confirmation, then back at Mia. Hi. I like your bear, Mia said, nodding to the stuffed animal Jamie was clutching. What's his name? Mr. Bear? That's a good name, very straightforward. That got a small smile. Dad says I'm not creative. Your dad's wrong, Mia said, shooting Ethan a playful look. Straightforward names are the best. My childhood stuffed animal was named Bunny. Really? Really, I wasn't good at coming up with fancy names either. Jamie considered this, then took a tentative step closer. Are you going to live here? Just for a little while, Mia said. Is that okay with you? Jamie shrugged, the universal kid gesture for, I don't know how I feel about this. I guess. Well, I promise not to take up too much space, and I make pretty good pancakes, if you like pancakes. I like pancakes. Then we're going to get along just fine. Ethan watched the exchange, something tight in his chest loosening just slightly. Mia was good with kids, patient, direct, not talking down to Jamie the way some adults did. And Jamie, for his part, seemed curious rather than scared, which was more than Ethan had hoped for. All right, Ethan said, breaking the moment before it could get awkward. Bedtime, buddy. School tomorrow. Jamie groaned but didn't argue. He headed to his room, pausing at the door to look back at Mia. Good night. Good night, Jamie. After Jamie was in bed, Ethan and Mia sat in the living room, the TV on low volume, neither of them really watching whatever show was playing. The awkwardness of new roommates settled over them, that weird space where you're sharing a home but don't know each other well enough to be comfortable. "He's a good kid," Mia said. "He is. Takes after his dad, I think." Ethan laughed, a short, bitter sound. "I don't know about that." "I do." Mia turned to look at him. "You're doing your best in an impossible situation. That counts for something." "Does it? Because most days it doesn't feel like enough." "It's enough," Mia said firmly. "Trust me. I grew up with parents who had all the money in the world and couldn't be bothered to show up for anything that mattered. You show up. That's more than a lot of kids get." Ethan didn't know what to say to that, so he just nodded. They sat in silence for a while longer, the only sounds the laugh track from the TV and the distant sirens of the city outside. "I should tell you," Mia said eventually. "My family. They're going to find me eventually. They always do. And when they do, it won't be pretty." "How much time do you think we have?" "I don't know. A week, maybe 2 if I'm lucky." They're methodical. They'll check shelters first, then hotels, then they'll start looking at residential areas, running facial recognition on security cameras, paying off building managers for information. It's only a matter of time. "And then what?" Mia's expression hardened. "Then I run again. Or I stand and fight. I haven't decided yet." "What would fighting look like?" "I don't know. I've never gotten far enough to find out." She pulled her knees up to her chest, making herself small. "Every time before, I've run, because it seemed easier, safer. But I'm tired of running. Tired of looking over my shoulder. Tired of letting them control my life, even when I'm not there. So maybe this time you stand. Maybe." She looked at him. "But I won't do it here. I won't bring that fight to your door, to Jamie's home. When they find me, I'll leave. That's non-negotiable." "We'll figure it out when it happens," Ethan said, though he had no idea how. He was a warehouse worker, not a bodyguard. He had no resources, no connections, nothing that could stand up against a family with the kind of power Mia was describing. But that was a problem for future Ethan. Present Ethan was just trying to get through one day at a time. The next morning started differently. Ethan woke up to the smell of pancakes and the sound of Jamie laughing in the kitchen. Actual laughing, not the polite version he did when adults tried to be funny. He got dressed and found his son at the table with a stack of pancakes in front of him, Mia standing at the stove flipping more. "Morning," she said brightly. "Hope you don't mind. I promised pancakes." "These are really good," Jamie announced through a mouthful of food. "Way better than the frozen ones." "Everything's better than the frozen ones," Ethan muttered, pouring himself coffee. They ate breakfast together, the three of them around the small table, and it felt almost normal. Almost like a real family instead of a collection of broken pieces trying to fit together. Mia asked Jamie about school, about his favorite subjects and his friends, and Jamie answered with more enthusiasm than Ethan had seen from him in months. "Can Mia walk me to school?" Jamie asked as they were finishing up. Ethan glanced at Mia, who nodded. "Sure, buddy, if Mia doesn't mind." "I don't mind at all." So that's how the morning went. Mia walked Jamie to school while Ethan got ready for work. And when she came back, she had that slightly breathless look of someone who'd been talking to a 6-year-old for 6 blocks straight. "He talks a lot once he gets comfortable," she said. "Yeah, he does. He told me about the park. How you keep promising to take him, but work gets in the way." Ethan felt his defenses rise. "I'm doing the best I can." "I know. I wasn't criticizing." Mia grabbed her jacket from the couch. "I was thinking, Saturday. If you can't get out of work, I could take him. To the park. Give him something to look forward to that actually happens." "You don't have to do that." "I want to. Besides, he deserves to have someone follow through on a promise." The words stung, but she wasn't wrong. "Okay, Saturday, but I'm going to try to get the day off." "Good." Ethan left for work with a strange feeling in his chest, something that might have been hope or might have been terror. It was hard to tell the difference anymore. The week settled into a rhythm. Mia would have breakfast ready when Ethan and Jamie woke up. She'd walk Jamie to school, then spend the day cleaning, organizing, fixing small things around the apartment that Ethan had long ago stopped noticing were broken. She'd pick Jamie up from school, help with homework, make dinner. And somehow, in the spaces between all of that, she made it feel less like charity and more like family. Jamie blossomed under the attention. He talked more, smiled more, stopped having nightmares in the middle of the night. He'd come home with drawings from school and show them to Mia first, saving Ethan's reaction for second. And instead of feeling jealous, Ethan just felt grateful that his son had someone who cared. But Mia was still looking over her shoulder, still checking the windows at odd times, still jumping when someone knocked on a neighbor's door a little too loud. The fear was always there, lurking beneath the surface of whatever temporary peace they'd built. On Friday night, after Jamie was asleep, Mia and Ethan sat on the couch with cheap beer from the corner store, too tired to do anything but exist in the same space. "Thank you," Ethan said quietly, "for this week, for everything. Don't thank me yet. We still have tomorrow." "Still? It's been good. Jamie's been good. Hell, I've been sleeping better, which is saying something." Mia smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "I've been happy here, happier than I've been in a long time. That's going to make it harder when I have to leave." "Maybe you won't have to." "I will." She took a sip of her beer. "It's not a question of if, Ethan, it's when. And the longer I stay, the more danger I'm putting you both in. Let us worry about that." "No." Her voice was firm. "That's not how this works. I won't let my problems become yours." Ethan wanted to argue, but the look on her face told him it would be pointless. So instead, he just sat there, drinking his beer, watching some mindless show on TV, and pretending that tomorrow wouldn't come. That they could stay in this moment forever, suspended in time, safe from whatever was coming. But tomorrow always came, and when it did, everything would change. Saturday morning arrived with pale sunlight breaking through the apartment windows, catching dust motes in the air like tiny stars. Ethan had actually managed to get the day off. Rick had been surprisingly accommodating when he'd asked, probably because Ethan never asked for anything. And the three of them were planning the park trip Jamie had been talking about all week. Jamie was up before either of them, bouncing around the apartment with barely contained energy. "Is it time yet? Can we go now?" "After breakfast," Mia said from the kitchen, where she was making French toast. "You need fuel if you're going to run around all day. But I'm not hungry." "You will be. Trust me." Ethan watched them from the doorway of his bedroom. This routine they'd fallen into so naturally, it was like they'd been doing it for years instead of days. Mia had pulled her hair back in a ponytail, wearing one of his old hoodies over jeans she'd bought from the thrift store down the street. She looked younger like this, relaxed, almost content, almost like someone who wasn't running from anything. Almost. They ate breakfast together, Jamie talking nonstop about the swings and the slide, and whether they'd see any dogs at the park because he really wanted to pet a dog. Mia listened with genuine interest, asking questions, making plans, and Ethan felt that strange tightness in his chest again, the one that showed up whenever he realized how much better Jamie's life had gotten in just 1 week. The park was 8 blocks away, a patch of green space in the middle of concrete and asphalt. The playground equipment was old but functional, the kind of place where neighborhood kids gathered on weekends while parents sat on benches and pretended to watch, while scrolling through their phones. Jamie took off running the second they got there, heading straight for the swings. Mia followed at a more measured pace, and Ethan hung back, watching the two of them together. She pushed Jamie on the swing higher and higher until he was shrieking with laughter, and something about that sound, pure joy, uncomplicated happiness, made Ethan's throat tight. "Higher," Jamie shouted. "I want to touch the sky." "I don't think the swing goes that high," Mia called back, laughing. "Then push harder." She did, and Jamie soared up, his legs pumping, his hair whipping in the wind. And for just a moment, Ethan let himself imagine this was real. That this was his life. A normal Saturday with his son and someone who cared about them both. Someone who'd chosen to stay instead of choosing to leave. But reality had a way of crashing in when you least expected it. Ethan's phone rang. Unknown number. He almost didn't answer, but something made him pick up. "Is this Ethan Blake?" A woman's voice. Professional. Cold. "Yeah, who's this?" "My name is Victoria Chen. I'm calling on behalf of the Collins family. I believe you have something that belongs to them." His blood went cold. He turned away from the playground, lowering his voice. "I don't know what you're talking about. Mr. Blake, let's not waste each other's time. Mia Collins has been staying in your apartment for the past week. We have surveillance footage from your building, witness statements from your neighbors, and financial records showing purchases made in the area. We know she's there. Ethan's mind raced. How had they found her so fast? Mia said they had a week, maybe 2. It had barely been 7 days. Even if that were true, she's an adult. She can stay wherever she wants. She can. And you can face charges for harboring a fugitive, interfering with a family matter, and potentially kidnapping. Kidnapping? That's insane. She came to me. That's not how her father sees it. Victoria's voice remained calm, measured, like she was discussing the weather instead of threatening him. Mr. Collins is a reasonable man, Mr. Blake. He doesn't want this to become a legal matter. He simply wants his daughter home safe. Then maybe he should ask her what she wants instead of sending lawyers to threaten people. There was a pause. I can appreciate your loyalty to Ms. Collins, but you need to understand what you're dealing with. The Collins family has resources you can't imagine. They have lawyers who make problems disappear. They have connections in law enforcement, in child services, in every system that could make your life very difficult. Child services. The words hit him like a punch. You wouldn't. We wouldn't want to. But if you force our hand, if you continue to harbor Ms. Collins against her family's wishes, then yes, we would explore every legal avenue available, including an investigation into whether your home is a suitable environment for a 6-year-old child. Ethan's hand tightened around the phone. You leave my son out of this. Then make this easy. Tell us where Ms. Collins is, and we'll handle this matter quietly. You and your son can go back to your normal lives, and no one needs to get hurt. And if I don't? Then we proceed with legal action. And Mr. Blake, I should mention that legal battles are expensive, very expensive. Can you afford a lawyer? Can you afford to take time off work for court dates? Can you afford to lose custody of your son while the system investigates whether you're fit to be a parent? The threat hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. Ethan looked back at the playground, at Jamie laughing on the swings, at Mia pushing him higher, both of them blissfully unaware that everything was about to fall apart. How much? He said quietly. Excuse me? How much to make this go away? That's what this is really about, right? You want me to turn her over, and you're willing to pay for it. So, how much? Another pause. Mr. Collins is prepared to offer $50,000 as a thank you for keeping his daughter safe. All you need to do is tell us where she is. $50,000. More money than Ethan had seen in his entire life. Enough to pay off his debts, fix everything that was broken, give Jamie the life he deserved. Enough to solve every problem that kept him up at night. All he had to do was betray someone who trusted him. I need to think about it, he said. You have 24 hours. After that, we proceed with legal action. Victoria rattled off a phone number. Call me when you've made your decision, Mr. Blake. And choose wisely. You have a son to think about. The line went dead. Ethan stood there, phone still pressed to his ear, feeling like the ground had opened up beneath him. 24 hours. $50,000. The life of his son hanging in the balance against the safety of a woman he'd known for a week. Dad, come push me! Jamie's voice cut through the fog. Ethan pocketed his phone and walked back to the playground, his legs feeling like they were made of lead. Mia was helping Jamie onto the monkey bars now, standing close in case he fell, and she looked up when Ethan approached. Everything okay? She asked. Yeah, just work stuff. The lie came easily, but it tasted like ash. She studied his face for a moment, and he could see the question in her eyes, but she didn't push. They spent another hour at the park, Jamie playing until he was exhausted and grass-stained, and the whole time Ethan felt like he was watching it all through glass, like he was already separate from this moment, this happiness, this brief pretense of normal. They got ice cream on the walk home, cheap cones from the convenience store, melting faster than they could eat them. Jamie got chocolate all over his face and didn't care. And Mia laughed at something he said, and Ethan wanted to freeze this moment forever, wanted to press pause and live here in this one perfect afternoon before everything went to hell. But time kept moving forward, it always did. Back at the apartment, Jamie crashed on the couch, exhausted from the day, and Ethan found himself in the kitchen with Mia, both of them cleaning up from lunch in silence. You're quiet, she said finally, quieter than usual. Just tired. That's not it. She set down the dish she was washing. What happened? That phone call, it wasn't work, was it? Ethan kept his eyes on the sink, watching water swirl down the drain. He could lie. Could put this off for a few more hours, let them have one more night of peace. But what was the point? She'd find out eventually. They always did. They found you, he said. The dish towel slipped from her hands. What? Your family. They called me. A lawyer, I think. Said they know you're here, that they've been watching the building. Mia's face went white. When? At the park, about an hour ago. And you didn't tell me? We've been walking around out there, exposed, and you didn't think I should know? I was trying to give Jamie one good day, one afternoon, where things were normal. There's no normal for me, Ethan. There's only running or getting caught. She was pacing now, her hands shaking. What did they say? What did they want? They want me to tell them where you are. Officially. On record. They're threatening legal action if I don't cooperate. What kind of legal action? Against me. Against my custody of Jamie. He finally looked at her. They're playing hardball, Mia. They've got lawyers and money, and they're not messing around. She stopped pacing, her back to him. I'll leave tonight. Right now. I'll pack my stuff and go, and you can tell them you had no idea where I went. They're offering $50,000. The words came out before he could stop them, and Mia turned slowly, her expression unreadable. What? For turning you in. For telling them where you are. $50,000, just for making a phone call. Are you going to take it? The question hung between them, sharp as a knife. And the terrible thing was, Ethan had been asking himself the same thing for the past hour. $50,000. A way out of the hole he'd been living in. A chance to give Jamie everything he'd never had. I don't know, he admitted. Something flashed across Mia's face. Hurt, betrayal, understanding, all mixed together. You should take it. What? I'm serious. Take the money. Tell them where I am. It's the smart play. She moved closer, her voice urgent. This is your chance, Ethan. You could pay off your debts, get a better place, hire that tutor for Jamie. You could actually give him a good life instead of just surviving. By selling you out? I'm not your responsibility. I'm not your family. I'm just some stranger who showed up on your doorstep and complicated your life. She was talking faster now, like if she said it quickly enough, it would hurt less. You owe me nothing, but you owe Jamie everything. So take the money and give your son the life he deserves. Is that really what you want? What I want doesn't matter. What matters is Jamie and you, and not letting my mess destroy what you've built here. What I've built? Ethan laughed, harsh and bitter. Look around, Mia. This isn't building anything. This is barely holding on. And yeah, $50,000 would help, but at what cost? I'd be the guy who sold out someone who trusted him. How do I look my son in the eye after that? How do I teach him to be a good person when I'm not one? You're a good person because you're even struggling with this choice. Most people would have made the call already. Maybe they'd be smarter than me. Maybe. She sat down at the kitchen table, suddenly deflated. Or maybe they'd just be less stubborn. Ethan sat across from her, and for a long moment they just looked at each other. Two people who'd stumbled into each other's lives by accident, who'd built something fragile and real in the space of a week, now facing the consequences of that choice. Tell me about your family, Ethan said. The real story, not the sanitized version you gave me that first night. I want to know what I'm up against. Mia took a deep breath. My father's name is Richard Collins. He built Collins Industries from nothing, started with a small construction company 40 years ago, and turned it into a conglomerate. Real estate, tech investments, media holdings. He's worth about $3 billion, give or take. Ethan whistled low. That's a lot of zeros. It's a lot of power, a lot of control. And he wields it like a weapon. She picked at a scratch in the table surface. I grew up in a mansion in Connecticut. Went to private schools, had nannies and tutors, wore clothes that cost more than most people's rent. From the outside, it looked perfect. But inside those walls, everything was about maintaining the image. The Collins name, the Collins legacy. What about your mother? She died when I was 12. Cancer. After that, it was just me and my father and his expectations. Her voice went flat, distant. He had my entire life planned out. The schools I'd attend, Harvard for undergrad, Wharton for business school. The career I'd have, executive track at Collins Industries, groomed to eventually take over. The man I'd marry, someone from another wealthy family, someone who'd be an asset to the business. Marcus Ashford. Marcus Ashford, she confirmed. His family owns Ashford Properties, biggest real estate portfolio on the East Coast. A marriage between us would merge the companies, create a dynasty. That's all my father cares about. Legacy. Dynasty. The Collins name lasting forever. And you don't want that. I wanted to be a teacher. The admission came out soft, almost embarrassed. I wanted to work with kids, help them learn, make a difference in small ways that actually mattered. But my father laughed when I told him. Said teaching was beneath me, that I was throwing away my potential, that Collins women don't become teachers. So you ran. So I ran. First time was right after college. Made it 3 weeks before they found me in Philadelphia, dragged me home, put me in therapy to correct my thinking. Second time was after grad school, business school, because I didn't have a choice about that. Made it a month that time, got all the way to Chicago before they tracked me down. She looked at him. This is the third time, and probably the last because I'm almost out of money and running out of places to hide. Why now? What changed? My father set a wedding date. 6 months from now, big ceremony at the estate, 500 guests, coverage in all the society pages. He announced it without asking me, like I was just another business deal to close. And I realized if I didn't leave then, I never would. That I'd wake up in 10 years, married to a man I didn't love, doing a job I hated, living a life that wasn't mine, so I ran. And here you are. Here I am. She smiled sadly, hiding in a crappy apartment in a city I'd never been to before, waiting for the inevitable moment when they find me and drag me back. Except this time, I've dragged you and Jamie into it too. We'll figure it out. How? They have unlimited resources. They have lawyers and investigators and more money than you'll see in 10 lifetimes. What do you have? Stubbornness, apparently. Ethan leaned back in his chair, and a really strong dislike for people who think money means they own other people. That's not going to be enough. Maybe not, but I'm not calling that number. I'm not taking their money. Ethan, I'm not. His voice was firm. We'll find another way. There is no other way. Then we'll make one. Mia stared at him like he'd lost his mind. And maybe he had. Maybe the smart play was exactly what she'd said. Take the money, turn her in, save himself and Jamie from the storm that was coming. But every time he thought about making that call, about hearing the satisfaction in Victoria Chen's voice as she confirmed the wire transfer, he felt sick. Some things weren't for sale. He was still trying to figure out if his soul was one of them. The rest of the day passed in tense silence. Jamie woke up from his nap and wanted to play, and they went through the motions, board games and cartoons and dinner that none of them had much appetite for. Jamie could sense something was wrong, the way kids always could, and he kept looking between the two adults with worried eyes. Are you guys fighting? He asked at dinner. No, buddy, just tired. You're always tired. Yeah, well, being a grown-up is exhausting. After Jamie went to bed, Ethan and Mia sat in the living room, the TV on, but neither of them watching it. The deadline Victoria had given him kept ticking down in his head. 24 hours, which meant they had until tomorrow afternoon before things got complicated. I could call a friend, Mia said suddenly. Someone from college. She lives in Seattle, might be willing to let me crash for a while. You have friends you haven't contacted? I couldn't. If my father found out they'd helped me, he'd make their lives hell. He's done it before, gotten people fired, tanked their businesses, destroyed their reputations. I couldn't risk it. But you're willing to risk it now. I'm out of options. She pulled her knees up to her chest. And I'm out of time. If they know I'm here, they probably know everything else too. Where I've been, who I've talked to, what I've been doing, they're closing the net. Ethan's phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. 16 hours remaining. Choose wisely. He showed it to Mia, who went pale. They're not subtle, she said. No, they're not. Another buzz. This time, a photo. Jamie at the park that afternoon, on the swings, crystal clear like it had been taken with a professional camera. The message below it, beautiful boy. Would be a shame if anything disrupted his life. Ethan felt rage flood through him, hot and sudden. They're threatening my son. They're showing you what they can do, that they're always watching. Mia's voice was shaking. This is what I was afraid of. This is why I should have left days ago. They can watch all they want. They touch Jamie and I'll... You'll what? Fight a team of lawyers with unlimited resources? They're not going to hurt him, Ethan. They're just going to make your life impossible until you give them what they want. Then let them try. But even as he said it, fear was creeping in. Fear of losing Jamie, of having his son taken away because some rich family wanted to prove a point. Fear of being crushed by a system he didn't understand and couldn't fight. His phone rang again, same unknown number. "Don't answer it," Mia said. He answered it anyway. "Mr. Blake." Victoria Chen's voice, still calm, still professional. "I see you received our messages. You stay away from my son. We're not interested in your son, Mr. Blake. We're interested in Miss Collins. Tell us where she is, and this all goes away." "She's right here, in my apartment. You already knew that. We need you to confirm it officially, on record, and we need you to keep her there until our people arrive." "So I'm supposed to be your prison guard now?" "Think of it as protective custody. We'll have someone there within the hour. All you need to do is make sure she doesn't leave. And if I don't, then we proceed with legal action. Child services will be at your door Monday morning with questions about your living situation, your work hours, whether your son is being adequately supervised. They'll want to interview him, examine your home, review your financial records. And while all that's happening, Jamie will be placed in temporary foster care until the investigation concludes." The words hit him like physical blows. Foster care. His son, taken away, put in a strange home with strange people while bureaucrats decided if Ethan was fit to be a parent. "You can't do that," he said, but he knew they could. He'd heard the stories, knew how easy it was for the system to take kids away from parents who couldn't fight back. "We can. And we will. Unless you cooperate. This doesn't have to be complicated, Mr. Blake. Just tell us you'll keep Miss Collins there, and we'll make this all very worth your while." Ethan looked at Mia, who was watching him with tears in her eyes. She shook her head slowly, and he knew what she was telling him. "Save yourself. Save Jamie. Let me go." "I need more time," he said into the phone. "You have until tomorrow at 3 p.m. After that, the offer expires and we proceed with legal action. Don't make this harder than it needs to be." The line went dead. Ethan set the phone down carefully, like it might explode if he moved too fast. "They want me to keep you here, until their people arrive. So I'm bait. You're leverage. What are you going to do?" That was the question, wasn't it? What was he going to do? Turn her over and take the money? Try to fight and lose everything? Run with her and Jamie? Become fugitives themselves? "I don't know," he admitted, "but we have until tomorrow to figure it out." "There's nothing to figure out. You know what you have to do." "Don't." "Ethan, I said don't." He stood up, pacing the small living room. "I'm not giving up yet. There has to be another way." "There isn't. You're not thinking clearly because you're a good person and you want to help. But sometimes helping means knowing when to walk away." "I don't walk away from people. Even when walking away is the only smart choice." "Especially then." Mia laughed, but it came out as a sob. "You're going to lose everything. Maybe. Or maybe I'll win something for once instead of just surviving." "You can't win against people like my family. Nobody does." "Then I'll be the first." But even as he said it, Ethan knew he was lying to himself. Knew that tomorrow would come and he'd have to make a choice that would change everything, no matter which option he picked. Save his son and betray someone who trusted him, or stand his ground and risk losing the only thing that mattered. Some choices didn't have good answers. Some choices just had different kinds of pain. The night stretched out before them, full of silence and fear, and the terrible knowledge that morning would bring consequences neither of them was ready to face. They didn't sleep that night. Ethan sat in the kitchen with cold coffee he kept forgetting to drink, and Mia paced the living room like a caged animal, checking the windows every few minutes like her father's people might appear at any second. The clock on the microwave counted down the hours. Midnight, 1 a.m., 2 a.m., each minute bringing them closer to the deadline neither of them wanted to face. Around 3 in the morning, Jamie's door creaked open. He stood in the hallway in his SpongeBob pajamas, rubbing his eyes, Mr. Bear dragging on the floor behind him. "Can't sleep?" Ethan asked, his voice rough from exhaustion. Jamie shook his head and climbed into his father's lap, something he hadn't done in months. He was getting too big for it, his legs hanging awkwardly, but Ethan wrapped his arms around him anyway and held on tight. "Bad dreams again?" "Kinda." Jamie pressed his face against Ethan's chest. Are you and Mia gonna go away? The question hit like a sucker punch. What makes you think that? You're acting weird, like Mom did before she left, all quiet and sad. Ethan exchanged a look with Mia over his son's head. She'd stopped pacing, was standing frozen by the window with her hand pressed to her mouth. Nobody's going anywhere, buddy, Ethan said, even though he didn't know if that was true. Even though in 12 hours he might have to choose between that promise and everything else. Promise? I promise I'll always be here. That's never changing. What about Mia? Mia came over slowly, kneeling down next to them. Her eyes were red-rimmed, but she forced a smile. I'm not your mom, Jamie. You know that, right? I know. But I care about you. A lot. And whatever happens, that doesn't change. So you are leaving. Kids were too smart. They picked up on things adults tried to hide, read between the lines of careful words. Jamie looked between the two of them, and Ethan could see him doing the math, connecting dots he shouldn't have to connect at 6 years old. I might have to, Mia said gently. Not because I want to, but because sometimes grown-ups have complicated problems that are hard to explain. Is it because of the bad people? Ethan stiffened. What bad people? The ones in the car. They've been outside for 2 days. Mrs. Chen told me not to worry about it, but I saw them taking pictures. Ethan stood up so fast, Jamie almost fell off his lap. He went to the window and looked down at the street. Sure enough, there was a black sedan parked across from the building, same spot it had been in yesterday when he'd left for work. He'd noticed it then, but thought nothing of it. Now he realized they'd been watching the whole time, documenting everything, building their case. Those people aren't here to hurt anyone, Ethan said, trying to keep his voice calm. They're just watching, that's all. Why? Because they want something from us, and they think watching will help them get it. What do they want? Mia answered before Ethan could. They want me to go back to a place I don't want to be, to do things I don't want to do, to live a life that isn't mine. Jamie processed this with the seriousness of a much older kid. That's not fair. No, it's not. Can't you just tell them no? I have many times, but they don't listen very well. Dad says when people don't listen, you have to be louder. Despite everything, Ethan found himself smiling. I did say that, didn't I? So be louder, Jamie said, like it was the simplest solution in the world. Tell them no really loud so they have to hear it. If only it worked that way, buddy. But as Ethan looked at his son, at the fierce determination in his young face, at the way he'd unconsciously positioned himself between Mia and the window like he could protect her, something shifted inside him. This kid who'd had so little in life, who'd lost his mother and spent too many nights alone, was willing to fight for someone who'd been kind to him for a week, was willing to be brave when the adults around him were drowning in fear. You should go back to bed, Ethan said. It's late. I don't want to. Jamie, I don't want Mia to leave while I'm sleeping, like Mom did. The words hung in the air, heavy with old pain and new fear. Ethan felt his heart crack a little more, another piece breaking off to join all the other broken pieces that made up his life as a father. I'm not going anywhere tonight, Mia said firmly. I promise. When I leave, if I leave, I'll say goodbye first, okay? You promise? I promise. Jamie seemed to accept that. He let Ethan carry him back to bed, tucked him in with Mr. Bear, and watched his father with those two old eyes until he finally drifted off to sleep. When Ethan came back to the living room, Mia was crying. Not the quiet, controlled crying she'd done before, but full-on sobs that shook her whole body. He sat down next to her on the couch and didn't say anything, just let her cry until she was empty. I can't do this to him, she said finally. I can't be another person who leaves. He's already been through too much. Then don't leave. It's not that simple. Why not? You stay, we figure it out together, we tell your family to go to hell. And then what? They take Jamie away while they investigate you? They destroy your life piece by piece until there's nothing left? I won't let that happen. That's not your choice to make. Yes, it is. She turned to look at him, her face blotchy and tear-stained. You've given me something I haven't had in years, Ethan. You've given me a home, a family, even if it's temporary. You've let me feel like I matter for something other than my last name and my father's money. And I won't repay that by destroying everything you have. What if what I have isn't worth saving without you in it? The words came out before he could stop them, and they hung between them like a confession neither of them was ready for. Don't, Mia whispered. Don't say things like that. Why not? It's true. This past week, with you here, it's the first time in 2 years that this place has felt like a home instead of just a place we sleep. Jamie's happier. I'm happier. Everything's just better. Better until my family destroys it all. So we fight them. With what? Hope and good intentions? That's not going to stand up against their lawyers. Then we get our own lawyer. With what money? Ethan didn't have an answer for that. His bank account had maybe $300 in it on a good week, and lawyers cost thousands, tens of thousands for something like this. He was outgunned, outmanned, and out of his depth. But Jamie's words kept echoing in his head. Be louder. Tell them no really loud. What if we went public? He said suddenly. Mia frowned. What? Your family wants to keep this quiet, right? That's why they're offering money instead of just showing up with the police. Because having their daughter run away and hide in a crappy apartment with a single dad and his kid, that's bad press. That's the kind of story that makes people ask questions. So what are you suggesting? We tell the story first, before they can spin it. We go to the media. We tell them everything about the arranged marriage, about them tracking you down, about the threats. We make it so loud they can't ignore it. Mia was shaking her head before he finished. That'll never work. They own media companies. They have relationships with editors, publishers, journalists. They'll kill the story before it even runs. Not all of them. There's got to be someone who'll run it. Some outlet that cares more about the truth than about staying in your father's good graces. And even if there is, then what? My life becomes a circus. Your life becomes a circus. Jamie gets caught in the middle of it all. Is that really better than me just leaving? I don't know. But at least it's fighting back instead of rolling over. Mia stood up, pacing again. You don't understand what you're suggesting. Going up against my father publicly. It's not just a news story. It's war. He'll come after you with everything he has. He'll dig up every mistake you've ever made, every parking ticket, every late bill. He'll paint you as an opportunist who took advantage of his vulnerable daughter. He'll make you look like the villain. Let him try. You're not listening to me. No, you're not listening to me. Ethan stood too, facing her. I'm tired of powerful people pushing around people like me because they think we're too scared to fight back. I'm tired of watching my son grow up learning that the world is just something that happens to you, not something you can change. Maybe we lose. Probably we lose. But at least we tried. That's easy to say when you haven't seen what they're capable of. Then show me. Call their bluff. Let's see how far they're really willing to go. They stared at each other, the apartment silent except for the hum of the refrigerator and the distant sound of traffic outside. Ethan could see her wavering, could see the part of her that wanted to believe this could work fighting against the part that had been beaten down too many times. There's a reporter, she said finally, Sarah Mitchell. She works for a mid-sized news outlet, big enough to have reach, small enough to not be in my father's pocket. We were friends in college before he found out and made me cut contact. She's been trying to investigate Collins Industries for years, but she never had enough to make anything stick. Would she help? Maybe, if we could get to her before my family realizes what we're doing. Then let's do it. It's Sunday morning. She's probably not even at work. So we call her at home. We show up at her apartment. We do whatever it takes. Mia pulled out her phone, hands shaking, and scrolled through old contacts she'd kept even though she wasn't supposed to. She found the number, stared at it for a long moment, then pressed dial before she could change her mind. It rang 4 times. Then a sleepy voice answered. Hello? Sarah? It's Mia Collins. There was a long pause. Mia? Holy shit, where are you? Your family's been looking everywhere. I know. That's why I'm calling. I need your help. And I need you to not tell anyone we talked. What's going on? I'm blowing the whistle on my father, on the whole company, the arranged marriage, the control, everything. But I need someone to tell the story right, and I need them to do it fast. Another pause. Are you serious? Dead serious, mate. Where are you right now? Mia looked at Ethan, who nodded. I'm in the city, with someone who's been helping me. We can meet you anywhere, but it has to be today. They're coming for me tomorrow. Okay, let me think. The sound of movement, like Sarah was getting out of bed. There's a diner on 5th and Marshall. Know it? I can find it. Meet me there in 2 hours. And Mia? Bring everything. Documents, photos, anything that backs up your story. Because if we're doing this, we're doing it right. I will. Thank you, Sarah. Don't thank me yet. This is going to get messy. It already is. Mia hung up and looked at Ethan with something that might have been hope or might have been terror. I can't believe we're doing this. We're being louder, Ethan said, just like Jamie said. They spent the next hour going through everything Mia had managed to take when she ran. Documents from her father's office that she'd copied, emails about the merger with Ashford Properties, text messages from her father laying out exactly what he expected from her. It wasn't much, but it was enough to show a pattern of control, of a young woman being treated like property instead of a person. At 7 a.m., Mrs. Chen knocked on the door. I heard voices, she said when Ethan answered. Everything okay up here? Not really, but we're working on it. The old woman looked past him to where Mia was organizing papers on the coffee table. The people in the car outside, they're trouble, aren't they? Yeah. I can watch Jamie today. You two do what you need to do. Mrs. Chen, I can't ask you to... You're not asking. I'm offering. That boy needs his father right now, and his father needs to be able to focus. So I'll take him for the day, feed him lunch, make sure he's safe. You go fix whatever needs fixing. Ethan felt his throat tighten. Thank you. That's what neighbors do. Now go before those people outside figure out you're up to something. They woke Jamie, told him he was spending the day with Mrs. Chen, and watched him go downstairs still half asleep and clutching Mr. Bear. Then they got ready to leave, knowing that the people watching the building would follow them, would report back to the Collins family, would try to stop what they were about to do. Back door, Mia said, through the alley. That's how I came in the first night. They slipped out through the building's rear exit, emerged into an alley that smelled like garbage and old rain, and started walking fast. Ethan kept checking over his shoulder, expecting to see someone following, but the alley was empty. They made it 3 blocks before he finally let himself believe they'd actually gotten out. The diner was the kind of place that looked like it hadn't changed since the 70s. Cracked vinyl booths, a counter with swivel stools, a waitress who looked like she'd been working there since the beginning of time. Sarah Mitchell was already there, sitting in a back booth with a laptop open and a coffee that had probably gone cold an hour ago. She looked up when they walked in, and Ethan saw the moment she recognized Mia. Her eyes went wide, then narrowed with the focus of a journalist who'd just stumbled onto the story of her career. You look like hell, Sarah said as they slid into the booth across from her. Thanks. You always knew how to make me feel special. I try. Sarah's gaze shifted to Ethan. And you are? Ethan Blake. I'm the guy who's been stupid enough to help. Stupid or brave? Sometimes it's hard to tell the difference. She pulled out a recorder and set it on the table. Okay, let's start from the beginning. And Mia, I need you to tell me everything. No holding back, no protecting anyone. If we're going to do this, we're going all in. So Mia talked. She talked for over an hour, laying out the whole story, the childhood of expectations and control, the business school she'd been forced to attend, the engagement to Marcus Ashford that had been arranged without her consent. She talked about running, about being found twice before, about the threats her father had made if she didn't comply this time. Sarah took notes, asked sharp questions, pushed for details that Mia didn't want to give. And through it all, Ethan sat and listened and realized just how deep the damage went, how many years of control had shaped the woman sitting next to him. What about the legal threats? Sarah asked. The ones against Ethan here? They're threatening to investigate him for child endangerment if he doesn't turn me over. They're using his son as leverage. Sarah looked at Ethan. You have proof of that? He pulled out his phone, showed her the texts, the photos of Jamie at the park. Sarah's expression darkened as she scrolled through them. That's witness intimidation at minimum, possibly worse. She looked up. You know, once I publish this, there's no going back, right? The Collins family is going to come at both of you with everything they have. We know, Mia said. And you're ready for that? No, but we're doing it anyway. Sarah smiled, the kind of smile that said she'd been waiting years for this moment. All right then. Give me the rest of the day to write this up, make some calls, get legal to sign off. I'll have it posted by tonight. Tonight? Ethan said. The deadline is 3 p.m. Then you better stay somewhere they can't find you until the story drops. Once it's public, the game changes. They can't disappear you quietly when the whole world is watching. Where are we supposed to go? I have a friend with an empty apartment in Queens. Nobody knows about it except me. You can crash there until things settle. We can't just leave, Mia said. Ethan's son. We'll be safer with you two out of the picture for a few hours, Sarah interrupted. Trust me. The Collins family wants this quiet. They're not going to do anything that draws attention while they're trying to find you. But once the story breaks, all bets are off. It made sense, even if Ethan hated it, even if every instinct in him was screaming to go back for Jamie, to keep his son close. But Sarah was right. The best way to protect Jamie was to make sure the Collins family couldn't use him as leverage anymore. They left the diner with an address scribbled on a napkin and took 3 different buses to get there, watching for tails the whole way. The apartment in Queens was small and spare, furnished with the basics and nothing else. They locked the door behind them and sat on a couch that had seen better days, waiting. What time is it? Mia asked for the 10th time. 1:30, an hour and a half until the deadline. Until Victoria Chen would make her call, would start the legal machinery that would try to tear apart everything Ethan had built, assuming the story broke in time, assuming Sarah came through, assuming any of this worked. We should call Jamie, Ethan said. And say what? That I love him, that everything's going to be okay. Even though he didn't know if it would be, he called Mrs. Chen's number. She answered on the second ring. He's fine, eating lunch, watching cartoons, being a good boy. Can I talk to him? She put Jamie on. Dad, where are you? I'm with Mia. We're working on fixing some things. How are you doing? Mrs. Chen makes weird soup, but it's good. Despite everything, Ethan smiled. That's good, buddy. Are the bad people still outside? I don't know, but Mrs. Chen won't let anything happen to you. You know that, right? I know. When are you coming home? Soon, I promise. Okay. I love you. I love you too, buddy. More than anything. He hung up and sat there with the phone in his hand, feeling the weight of that promise. Soon. He'd said soon, but he didn't know if it was true. Didn't know if they'd ever be able to go back to that apartment, to that life. 2 o'clock came, then 2:30. Ethan's phone rang. Victoria Chen's number. He let it go to voicemail. She called back immediately. Let that one go too. On the 3rd call, she left a message. Mr. Blake, your deadline has passed. As of 3 p.m., we will be proceeding with legal action. This is your last chance to reconsider. At 2:45, Sarah called. Story's live. Check your phone. Check. Ethan pulled up the news site on his browser. There it was, front page. Collins' heiress speaks out. A story of control, arranged marriage, and escape. Below it, a photo of Mia from her college graduation, smiling, looking nothing like the hunted woman she'd become. The article was everything they talked about and more, detailed, damning, pulling no punches. Sarah had included quotes from anonymous sources inside Collins Industries, hints at other stories of control and manipulation, suggestions that Mia wasn't the only one trapped by Richard Collins's need for legacy. It's everywhere, Sarah said on the phone. Picked up by 3 major outlets already. Twitter's blowing up. This is going viral. What does that mean for us? It means the Collins family can't make you disappear quietly anymore. It means public opinion is on your side. It means you've got a fighting chance. Ethan looked at Mia, who was reading the article on her own phone, tears streaming down her face. Thank you, he said to Sarah. Thank me by staying safe. They're going to be pissed. Rich people don't like being told no, especially not in public. She hung up. The apartment was quiet except for the sound of traffic outside and Mia crying. He's going to hate me, she said. My father. He's going to hate me for this. He already didn't respect you. At least now you're free. Am I? Or have I just traded one kind of prison for another? Ethan didn't have an answer for that. Freedom was messy, complicated, never as clean as the stories made it seem, but it was better than the alternative. It had to be. His phone rang again. Unknown number. Against his better judgment, he answered. Mr. Blake. A man's voice this time, older, with the kind of authority that came from decades of getting what he wanted. My name is Richard Collins. I believe you have something of mine. Your daughter isn't property. No, she's family, and family takes care of each other. His voice was calm, reasonable, which somehow made it more threatening. I've seen the article. Quite the story Ms. Mitchell has written. Full of emotion, light on facts. The public eats that up, don't they? The facts are all there if you're willing to see them. What I see is a young woman who's confused, who's been influenced by people who don't have her best interests at heart. People like you, Mr. Blake. I haven't influenced her to do anything. I just gave her a safe place when she needed one. And I'm sure you've been very generous, very helpful. But now it's time for Mia to come home, to face her responsibilities, to stop running from the life she was born into. That's not your decision to make, and it's not yours either. The calm cracked, just slightly, showing the steel underneath. You're a father. I'm a father. We both want what's best for our children. The difference is, I have the resources to ensure my child gets what she needs. Can you say the same? Are you threatening me again? I'm stating facts. You've made this situation public, which means it's no longer a private family matter. That's unfortunate, but it doesn't change the outcome. Mia will come home because she always does, and you'll be left dealing with the consequences of involving yourself in something you don't understand. Maybe, or maybe this time is different. We'll see. Richard Collins hung up. Ethan set the phone down, hands shaking. That was the man Mia had been running from. Calm, controlled, absolutely certain of his power. The kind of man who'd never lost because he'd never had to. What did he say? Mia asked. That you'll come home eventually, that this changes nothing. He's probably right. Don't say that. Why not? He's won every other time. He has money, lawyers, connections. What do we have? Each other, Jamie. A story that people are reading and sharing and caring about. That counts for something. Does it? Or are we just making noise before the inevitable happens? Ethan didn't know. He wanted to believe that truth mattered, that public opinion could shift the balance, that being right was enough. But he'd lived long enough to know that wasn't always true, that sometimes the bad guys won simply because they had more resources to throw at the problem. But he also knew that giving up guaranteed failure, and he hadn't come this far to roll over now. We're not done yet, he said. The story just broke. Let's see how things play out before we decide we've lost. Mia nodded, but he could see the doubt in her eyes. The weight of years of defeat, of running and being caught, of never quite managing to get free. And he realized that winning this fight wasn't just about beating her family. It was about convincing Mia herself that freedom was possible, that she deserved it, that she was worth fighting for. That was going to be the hardest battle of all. They stayed in the Queen's apartment for 3 days, watching the story explode across the internet like wildfire in dry brush. Every news outlet picked it up. Every social media platform had opinions. And suddenly, Mia Collins wasn't just a runaway heiress. She was a symbol of every person who'd ever been controlled by family money, every woman who'd been treated like property, every kid who'd been told their dreams didn't matter as much as the family legacy. Ethan watched it unfold on his phone, scrolling through comments and shares and hot takes from people who didn't know them but felt like they did. Some were supportive, calling Mia brave, calling Richard Collins a tyrant. Others were skeptical, saying she was ungrateful, that she didn't know how good she had it. A few were just cruel, picking apart her appearance, her choices, her life. Because that's what the internet did to people in the spotlight. Don't read the comments, he told Mia, after finding her crying over a particularly vicious thread. I can't help it. They're talking about me like they know me, like my whole life is just entertainment for them. That's what happens when you go public. People think they own a piece of your story. I hate it. I know. But the attention was also their protection. Sarah had been right about that. With thousands of eyes watching, Richard Collins couldn't make them disappear quietly. Couldn't send his people to drag Mia home without it becoming a bigger scandal than it already was. For now, public opinion was a shield, fragile but functional. On the second day, a lawyer called. Her name was Rebecca Torres, and she'd seen the story and wanted to help. Pro bono, she said. Cases like this, they're why I went to law school. We can't afford a lawyer, Ethan had said. That's what pro bono means. You don't pay. I do this because it matters. She came to the apartment that afternoon, a woman in her 40s with sharp eyes and an even sharper suit. She listened to the whole story again, took notes, asked questions that made Ethan uncomfortable and Mia cry. Here's what we're dealing with, Rebecca said when they finished. Richard Collins has money and power, but what he doesn't have is a legal leg to stand on. Mia's an adult. She can live wherever she wants, with whoever she wants. He can't force her to come home, can't force her to marry anyone. The threats against Ethan, those are actionable. Witness intimidation, potential blackmail. We can fight this. How long will it take? Mia asked. Months, probably. Maybe longer. The Collins family will drag it out as long as they can, hoping you'll give up. That's their strategy. Make fighting back so exhausting that compliance seems easier. And if we don't give up, then we win. Eventually. But it won't be pretty, and it won't be fast. Ethan thought about Jamie, about how many months of uncertainty his son could handle, thought about his job, which he'd already missed 2 days of, and whether Rick would hold his position or find someone more reliable. Thought about the bills piling up and the rent coming due and all the ways this fight could break them even if they won. We're in, he said, because what else could he say? Rebecca smiled. Good, then let's get to work. On the third day, something shifted. Ethan woke up to 17 missed calls from Mrs. Chen. His heart dropped into his stomach as he called her back. Where have you been? She demanded. I've been trying to reach you for hours. What's wrong? Is Jamie okay? He's fine. He's here with me. But there are people outside your building, not the ones in the car, different people, with cameras and microphones. They've been knocking on doors, asking questions about you and that girl. Reporters? I think so. And some of your neighbors are talking, telling them things. Ethan felt his stomach turn. The story had come to them, was camped out on their doorstep, turning their lives into public spectacle. What are they saying? Mostly good things? That you're a hard worker, that you love your boy. But some are saying you took advantage of a rich girl, that you're trying to get money out of her family. That kind of garbage. Of course they were. There was always someone ready to believe the worst, to turn a story of helping into a story of exploitation. Keep Jamie inside, Ethan said. Don't let him talk to anyone. I'll figure something out. Figure it out fast. This is getting out of hand. She hung up. Ethan sat there with his phone in his hand, feeling the walls closing in. They couldn't stay in Queens forever. They couldn't avoid going home forever. But going back meant walking into a circus, meant subjecting Jamie to questions and cameras and judgment he was too young to understand. We have to go back, Mia said. She was standing in the doorway, had clearly heard the whole conversation. This is getting worse, not better. It's only been 3 days. And in 3 days, we've turned your life into a media circus. Jamie shouldn't have to hide in Mrs. Chen's apartment because of my problems. There are problems now. No, they're my problems. You were just trying to help. She sat down next to him. I should leave. Really leave this time. Disappear properly so they stop bothering you. That's not going to work. The story's already out. Leaving now just makes it look like we were lying. So what do we do? Ethan didn't have an answer. For once, being stubborn and refusing to give up wasn't enough. They needed a real solution, a way forward that didn't involve running or hiding or fighting an endless legal battle. His phone rang. Richard Collins again. Don't answer it, Mia said, but Ethan answered anyway because he was tired of running from this man. What do you want? To talk, face to face. No lawyers, no reporters, no circus. Just me and Mia, having a conversation like civilized people. You lost the right to civilized conversation when you threatened my son. That was Victoria Chen overstepping. She's been let go. I don't make threats, Mr. Blake. I make offers. We're not interested in your offers. You haven't heard this one yet. Richard's voice was calm, measured. I'm willing to come to a compromise. Mia gets her freedom. I get to save face. Everyone walks away with something. What's the catch? No catch. Just a conversation. 1 hour. At a location of your choosing. Bring your lawyer if it makes you feel better. Ethan looked at Mia, who was shaking her head frantically. But something in Richard's voice sounded different than before. Less certain, maybe. Like a man who'd realized he was losing and was trying to find a way to lose gracefully. I'll talk to Mia. Call back in an hour. He hung up before Richard could respond. No, Mia said immediately. Absolutely not. He's lying. This is a trap. Maybe. Or maybe the public pressure is actually working. Maybe he's scared of what else might come out if this keeps going. My father doesn't get scared. He gets angry and then he gets even. Everyone gets scared when they're losing control. And right now, he's losing control of the narrative. Rebecca showed up an hour later. They'd called her immediately after Richard's call. She listened to the offer and frowned. It could be legitimate. The story has hurt his reputation badly. Business partners are pulling back, investors are nervous. He might genuinely want to negotiate. Or it's a setup, Mia said, which is why we meet in a public place. Lots of witnesses. Somewhere he can't pull anything without it being recorded. Rebecca pulled out her phone. I know a place. A hotel restaurant downtown. Public enough to be safe, private enough to talk. I'll set it up for tomorrow, late afternoon. That gives us time to prepare. What do we even negotiate? Ethan asked. Freedom, Rebecca said simply. Mia's right to live her own life without interference. In exchange, she agrees to certain conditions that let Richard save face with his business partners and social circle. It's about finding a middle ground both sides can live with. There is no middle ground, Mia said. Either I'm free or I'm not. Freedom isn't always absolute, Rebecca replied. Sometimes it's about accepting limitations you can live with instead of ones you can't. Your father wants legacy, wants the family name to continue. Maybe there's a way to give him that without sacrificing your whole life. They spent the rest of the day preparing. Rebecca drilled Mia on what to say, what not to say, how to handle her father's manipulation tactics. Ethan mostly listened, feeling out of his depth, wondering what he was even doing there. This wasn't his world. Negotiations with billionaires, lawyers planning strategy, fighting battles with words instead of fists. But when Mia reached for his hand during one of Rebecca's lectures, squeezing tight like she was holding on for dear life, he understood. He was there because she needed him to be. Because for once in her life, she had someone on her side who wasn't there for money or status or what they could get out of her. Someone who was just there. That night, they went back to the apartment. The reporters were still camped outside, but Rebecca had called ahead, arranged for building security to clear a path. Cameras flashed as they walked from the car to the door, voices shouting questions they didn't answer, and Ethan kept his arm around Mia's shoulders like he could physically shield her from it all. Mrs. Chen met them at the door with Jamie, who took one look at his father and burst into tears. I thought you weren't coming back. Ethan scooped him up, held him tight. I'm always coming back, buddy. Always. Promise? Promise. They got Jamie inside, away from the cameras and the chaos. He was wired, anxious, full of questions they didn't know how to answer in ways a 6-year-old would understand. So they made dinner, just pasta and sauce, nothing special, and sat around the table like they used to, pretending everything was normal even though nothing was. Are you famous now? Jamie asked Mia. I don't think so. Just temporarily interesting. Kids at school were talking about you. They saw you on their parents' phones. Mia winced. I'm sorry. That must have been weird. Kinda. But I told them you were nice, that you make good pancakes. That's probably the best review I could ask for. After Jamie went to bed, Ethan and Mia sat in the living room, not talking, just existing in the same space. The apartment felt different now, like it had been invaded by the outside world and would never quite be theirs again. I'm scared, Mia said quietly. Of tomorrow? Of seeing him again. Of being in the same room as my father after everything that's happened. Of finding out I'm still that scared girl who does whatever he says because it's easier than fighting. You're not that girl anymore. How do you know? Because that girl wouldn't have run, wouldn't have stayed away for 3 weeks, wouldn't have told her story to the world. You're already braver than you think you are. Or stupider. Sometimes they're the same thing. She smiled at that, just a little. What if I freeze tomorrow? What if I see him and all the words I've been practicing just disappear? Then I'll be there to remind you what you wanted to say, and Rebecca will be there. You won't be alone. I've been alone my whole life, even when I was surrounded by people. Not anymore. The words hung between them, heavy with meaning they hadn't quite acknowledged yet. Ethan didn't know when Mia had stopped being a stranger he was helping and started being someone he couldn't imagine losing. Didn't know when this had become about more than just doing the right thing. Maybe it was gradual, or maybe it had happened all at once when she'd pushed Jamie on those swings, and he'd heard his son laugh with pure joy for the first time in years. What happens after tomorrow? Mia asked. If this works, if we somehow reach an agreement, what happens to us? What do you want to happen? I don't know. I've spent so long running from what I didn't want that I never figured out what I do want. Then maybe that's the next thing you figure out. She looked at him, really looked at him, and for a moment he thought she might say something important, something that would change everything again. But then she just nodded and said goodnight, and the moment passed. Ethan lay in bed that night thinking about the meeting tomorrow, about Richard Collins and his offers and his need for control. Thinking about what compromise looked like and whether freedom with conditions was really freedom at all. Thinking about Jamie sleeping in the next room and how many more times his son could handle having his life turned upside down before something broke that couldn't be fixed. Morning came too fast. They dressed carefully. Rebecca had advised them to look respectable but not intimidated, confident but not arrogant. They dropped Jamie off with Mrs. Chen, who promised to keep him distracted with baking projects and cartoons. And then they headed downtown to meet the man who'd been controlling Mia's life since the day she was born. The hotel restaurant was upscale, the kind of place where people spoke in hushed voices and wore clothes that cost more than Ethan's monthly rent. Richard Collins was already there, sitting at a corner table with a cup of coffee and the bearing of a man who owned the place. He stood when they approached, and Ethan got his first real look at Mia's father. He was tall, mid-60s, with steel gray hair and eyes that assessed everything in seconds. Expensive suit, expensive watch, expensive everything. The kind of man who'd never been told no in his life and didn't plan to start now. "Mia," he said, his voice warm but his eyes calculating. "You look well." "I am well." "And this must be Mr. Blake, the warehouse worker who's been keeping my daughter safe." There was no hostility in his tone, but there didn't need to be. The words themselves were designed to remind Ethan of his place, of the gulf between them. "Just Ethan," he said, refusing to be diminished. "Ethan," Richard gestured to the chairs. "Please sit. Can I order you something? Coffee? Breakfast?" "We're not here for breakfast," Rebecca said, settling into her chair with the confidence of someone who'd dealt with powerful men before. "We're here to discuss terms. Direct. I appreciate that." Richard turned his attention to Mia. "You've caused quite a stir, daughter. The story has been illuminating." "You mean embarrassing?" "I mean instructive. I've learned things about how you perceive your upbringing that I hadn't realized. Perhaps I was too focused on providing opportunities and not enough on understanding what you actually wanted." Mia laughed, sharp and bitter. "Don't do that. Don't rewrite history to make yourself the misunderstood father. You knew exactly what you were doing. You just didn't care how I felt about it." Richard's expression flickered, surprise maybe, or annoyance. "I cared. I've always cared, but caring and enabling are different things. I thought I was preparing you for the life you were born into. I didn't ask to be born into that life. None of us ask to be born. We simply are, and then we make choices about what we do with the circumstances we're given." "Exactly, and I'm choosing something different." Richard took a sip of his coffee, and Ethan could see him recalculating, adjusting his approach. "Which brings us to why we're here. You want freedom. I want to protect what I've built. Perhaps there's a way for both of us to get what we need." "I'm listening," Rebecca said. "The engagement to Marcus Ashford is dissolved, permanently. I won't force Mia into marriage with anyone. That was a mistake, and I acknowledge it." Mia's eyes went wide. "What's the catch?" "No catch. But I do have conditions. You remain part of the Collins family. You attend major family functions, holidays, important company events. You don't publicly disparage Collins Industries or damage its reputation. And in 5 years, when you've had time to explore your options and live your life, we revisit the question of your role in the company." "I don't want a role in the company." "You might. In 5 years. People change. But that's a conversation for later. For now, you get your freedom. You live where you want, work where you want, date who you want. I don't interfere. In exchange, you remain connected to the family in ways that show we're not estranged." Ethan watched Mia's face as she processed this. It wasn't everything she wanted, complete disconnection from her father and his world, but it was more than she'd expected, more than she'd ever gotten before. "Why?" she asked. "Why now? Why not just keep fighting until I run out of money and options?" "Because I read the story, Mia. I read what you said about feeling like property instead of a person, about running away 3 times because you were that desperate, and I realized—" He paused, and for the first time something genuine showed through the polished exterior. "I realized I was in danger of losing my daughter permanently, Not because she died or moved away, but because she hated me so much she'd rather have nothing than be connected to me. And I don't want that. You should have thought about that before arranging my life like a business deal. I should have. You're right. But I'm thinking about it now. I'm offering you a way forward that doesn't require cutting me out completely. That's more than I've offered before. Rebecca leaned forward. What about the threats made against Ethan, the intimidation, the surveillance? That stops immediately. Victoria Chen acted without my full knowledge of her tactics. I've already terminated her employment. As far as I'm concerned, Mr. Blake was helping my daughter when she needed it. I'm grateful for that, not angry about it. And the legal action you threatened? Off the table, completely. Rebecca looked at Mia and Ethan. Can we have a moment to discuss this privately? Richard nodded and stood, walking away to give them space. It's a good offer, Rebecca said quietly. Better than I expected. He's giving you most of what you want. But not all of it, Mia said. No, but all of it might not exist. Complete freedom from family, from expectations, from any ties to your past, that's a fantasy for most people. This is real. This is workable. What do you think? Mia asked Ethan. He thought about the past week, about the fear and the running and the uncertainty. Thought about Jamie asking when they'd come home, about Mrs. Chen keeping his son safe while the world went crazy outside. Thought about all the ways fighting could break them, even if they won. I think it's your choice, he said. Not mine, not Rebecca's, not your father's. Yours. What do you want? Mia was quiet for a long time, staring at her hands folded on the table. I want to teach. Kids. Elementary school, maybe. Help them learn to read and think and ask questions. Is that allowed in this deal? Yes, Rebecca said. Nothing in his terms prevents that. And I can live wherever I want, with whoever I want? That's what he said. Even if that's in a crappy apartment with a warehouse worker and his 6-year-old son? Rebecca smiled. Even then, Mia took a deep breath and let it out slowly. Okay, let's do it. They called Richard back over. Spent the next hour hammering out details, getting everything in writing, making sure there were no loopholes or hidden conditions. And through it all, Ethan watched Mia negotiate with her father, not as a scared girl, but as an adult claiming her space in the world. She pushed back on things that mattered, compromised on things that didn't, and by the end of it, they had an agreement both sides could live with. Not perfect, not everything anyone wanted, but real, possible, a foundation they could build on. Richard signed first, then Mia, their signatures making it official. When it was done, Richard looked at his daughter across the table. I hope you'll call sometimes, not because you have to, but because you want to. Maybe. Eventually. We'll see. That's all I can ask. He stood, shook Rebecca's hand, nodded at Ethan, and walked away. Just like that, it was over. The fight that had consumed their lives for weeks, resolved over coffee and legal documents in a hotel restaurant where the waiters pretended not to notice anything unusual. They left through a side entrance to avoid the reporters who'd somehow found out about the meeting. Drove back to the apartment in silence, each of them processing what had just happened. When they got there, Mrs. Chen had Jamie in the hallway, and he ran to his father the second he saw them. Did you win? He asked. Yeah, buddy, we won. Does that mean Mia's staying? Ethan looked at Mia, who smiled and nodded. Yeah, if that's okay with you. Jamie threw his arms around her waist. It's okay with me. The reporters eventually got bored and left. The story faded from the front pages, replaced by newer scandals and fresher drama. Life slowly returned to something resembling normal, though normal looked different now. Mia enrolled in an education program at the community college, studying to become a teacher. She moved out of Ethan's apartment after a few months. Not because she wanted distance, but because she needed to prove to herself that she could live independently, that she wasn't just trading one dependence for another. She got a small place 3 blocks away, close enough to visit daily, far enough to be her own person. Ethan got a promotion at work. Nothing fancy, just a shift supervisor position that came with slightly better pay and slightly fewer backbreaking hours. He was able to cut back on the overtime, able to pick Jamie up from school a few days a week. The bills were still tight, but they were manageable. Life was still hard, but it wasn't quite so impossible anymore. Jamie thrived. With more stability, with Mia helping him with homework and Ethan having more time to be present, his grades improved. His reading caught up. He made friends, joined the soccer team at school, started bringing home drawings that actually got hung on the refrigerator instead of just stuffed in a drawer. And somewhere in the mess of rebuilding their lives, Ethan and Mia figured out what they were to each other. It wasn't a dramatic revelation or a perfect moment. It was quiet evenings making dinner together while Jamie did homework. It was Mia showing up with coffee when Ethan had a rough day at work. It was him helping her study for exams, quizzing her on educational theory while she quizzed him on nothing in particular. It was real, imperfect, built on a foundation of having seen each other at their worst and choosing to stay anyway. 2 years later, Mia graduated with her teaching certificate and got a job at Jamie's elementary school. Not as teacher, that would have been too weird, but down the hall, teaching second grade to kids who reminded her daily why she'd fought so hard for her freedom. Richard Collins showed up to her graduation, sat in the back, didn't make a scene, just watched his daughter accept her diploma for something he'd once called beneath her. Afterward, he approached carefully, like he was trying not to spook a wild animal. "Congratulations," he said. "Thank you." "Your mother would be proud." Mia's eyes filled with tears. The good kind. The kind that came from grief that had been acknowledged instead of ignored. "Yeah, she would. Perhaps we could have dinner sometime. Just the two of us. Talk. Maybe. In a few months. When I'm settled in the new job. I'll wait." And he did. They rebuilt their relationship slowly, carefully, with boundaries Mia enforced and Richard learned to respect. It wasn't perfect. They still fought sometimes, still disagreed on fundamental things. But it was honest, real, built on mutual respect instead of control. 3 years after that rainy night when Ethan found a stranger on his steps, he and Mia got married in a small ceremony at the courthouse. Jamie was the ring bearer, Mrs. Chen cried through the whole thing, and Richard gave a toast at the dinner afterward that was surprisingly gracious. They moved into a slightly bigger apartment in the same building. Couldn't afford anything fancy, but it had 2 bedrooms and a kitchen where they could all fit around the table. Mia kept teaching, Ethan kept working, and they built a life that looked nothing like either of them had imagined, but was exactly what they both needed. Because here's what Ethan learned through all of it, what he tried to teach Jamie as the years went on. Freedom wasn't about having no obligations or connections. It wasn't about running away from everything difficult until you found some perfect place where nothing hurt. Freedom was about choosing your obligations, choosing your connections, choosing the people you fought for and the life you built, even when it was hard, even when it wasn't perfect. And sometimes the bravest thing you could do wasn't running or fighting or standing your ground against impossible odds. Sometimes it was just opening a door on a rainy night and offering shelter to someone who needed it. Sometimes it was letting someone help you when you'd been taught your whole life that accepting help was weakness. Sometimes it was staying when leaving seemed easier, or compromising when you'd rather fight, or building something new from the broken pieces of what came before. Mia taught Jamie's class years later, when he was old enough to have her as a teacher and young enough to think it was cool instead of embarrassing. She taught him the same things she taught all her students: how to read critically, how to ask questions, how to think for himself. But she also taught him something else, something that didn't fit in any curriculum. She taught him that your circumstances didn't have to define you, that having money or not having money, coming from privilege or coming from nothing, none of that mattered as much as the choices you made with what you had. That family was whoever showed up, whoever stayed, whoever chose you back when you chose them. And on the days when life got hard, when bills piled up or work was exhausting or the world felt too big and too complicated, Ethan would think back to that first night, to the moment when he'd stood in the rain and made a choice that changed everything. And he'd realized that sometimes the best things in life came from moments when you had every reason to walk away, but decided to stay instead. Not because it was easy, not because it was smart, but because it was right. And because some people were worth fighting for, worth risking everything for, worth building a whole new life around. Jamie grew up understanding that home wasn't a place or a thing, but a choice you made every day. That family was whoever loved you enough to stay through the hard parts. That being brave didn't mean not being scared. It meant being scared and doing the right thing anyway. And when he was older, when he had his own choices to make about what kind of person he wanted to be, he remembered the night his father brought home a stranger in the rain, remembered how that one act of kindness had rippled out into everything good that came after, Remembered that sometimes the smallest choices had the biggest consequences, and that you never really knew which moment would be the one that changed everything. So he tried to be this kind of person who opened doors instead of closing them, who offered help instead of looking away, who chose connection over safety, community over isolation, love over fear, because that's what his parents had taught him, not just with words, but with the life they'd built together from nothing. A life that proved that where you started didn't matter nearly as much as where you chose to go. That happy endings weren't about everything being perfect. They were about finding people who made the imperfect parts bearable, about building something real from whatever pieces you had available, about choosing each other every day, even when it was hard, especially when it was hard. And as Ethan watched his son grow into a kind, thoughtful young man who opened doors for strangers and helped people without asking what was in it for him, he realized that maybe he'd done something right after all. Maybe his life hadn't turned out the way he'd planned, but it had turned out better than he'd ever imagined possible. Because he'd learned that night in the rain what really mattered. Not money or status or having everything figured out. Just showing up. Just being willing to help. Just opening a door and letting someone in, even when you had no idea where it would lead. That was the lesson. That was the point. That was what he'd try to remember on the hard days and what he'd celebrate on the good ones. That kindness mattered. That people mattered. That the smallest act of compassion could change lives in ways you'd never predict. And that sometimes the best thing you could ever do was simply to stay, to choose someone and let them choose you back, and build something beautiful from that simple, terrifying, perfect choice.